Policy Advisor here at RAC. I'll be facilitating today and also doing a presentation. For any of you online, if you have any questions or you can't hear or there's an issue, just pop the question in the chat and we'll respond. So before we start today, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people from the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Australians in the room here today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. So the elevators which you would have come through are just down the hall and to the right of the Better WA sign. Toilets are kind of opposite the elevators. And then for morning tea, we'll be going to the left down the hall at the end. It's a social space down there. So first we'll be having a talk from Tammie Deshon, who's kindly agreed to speak as a representative from WALGA. She'll be talking about Type 1 child restraint fitting, their program in WA. And then we'll be having Padraig McAlpine, or Paddy, from DOT, who will be talking about Type 2 child car restraint fitting and compliance in WA. Then we'll be hearing from Melanie Suitor. She will be presenting from New South Wales. So we have a remote speaker talking about her experiences with child restraint fitting and recycling. Then I'll be talking about some survey results that RAC has from a survey we ran last year on child restraints. Then morning tea at 10:50. And then our final speaker will be Felicity Heath from the Perth Children's Hospital. She'll be talking about child car restraint presentations in the emergency department. And then we're going to wrap up with a bit of a brainstorming session, which is why we have the chairs set out like this. So we'll be doing a bit of brainstorming to inform an ACRES submission into a review that NTC is doing on the child restraint road rules. So we'll have a bit of a brainstorm about some of the issues that we think might be present with child restraints and some potential solutions to that. Okay, so I'll hand over to Tammie. To change, just use the beautiful arrows. I'll just do a bit of an intro. So Tammie's the Child Car Safety Seat Project Coordinator within WALGA's Roadwise. She has been in this role with Roadwise since 2011 and previously worked in the local government road safety area in the UK. Through her role, she has been closely involved in the re-accreditation process of the accredited course, developing of the tools and resources, and supporting the WA network of Type 1 child car restraint fitters. Thanks, Tammie.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm already struggling with the technology, sorry. Just these keys here or the up and down? Okay. Okay, thanks for that, Rachel. As Rachel said, my name is Tammie Deshon from WALGA Roadwise, and I'm the coordinator for the Child Car Seat Safety Project there. I'm just going to have a bit of a talk today about the project that we deliver. It's comprised of 4 key areas. So we have the information side, we have the training side, the network, which we have the privilege to look after. So that's a network of Type 1 fitters throughout Western Australia. And also we try to work strongly with the collaboration. Firstly, from the information side, we have your standard website. So it's a specific website for child car seats. We have all your frequently asked questions and your minimum requirements. The difference that we really do have on that website is we have the contact list for all the Type 1 child car restraint fitters that are accessible by the community. The course information for people that want to become Type 1 fitters, and also links to services like Type 2 fitters and different links and guides. So we have links to the RAC, Department of Transport, the Road Safety Commission. We also have an information line that is manned 5 days a week by WALGA Roadwise staff who have been trained. And this information here is from the queries we received in 2024. So I've removed the queries that we received about training because that really sort of skewed the data. But what I thought was interesting is the vast majority of the queries were for people looking for either Type 1 fitters or Type 2 fitters, and also queries about the legislation and regulations. So they were people wanting to know what they actually had to do, what type of seats they had to put the kids in and where they needed to put them in the vehicle. One of the other sections we deal with is the training. So we deliver the accredited training in Type 1 child car restraint fitting. And being accredited training is comprised of 2 units of competency. So the first unit is really your information and advice. So it's all about developing the knowledge and being able to provide advice to customers and the community. The second unit is your installation and your checking. Now, being an accredited course, there's certain ways we have to deliver it. So the first unit is a prerequisite unit, and we're not allowed to deliver it as a bundle. We have to deliver that first unit. They need to complete that unit, and then they can attend the second unit. So we had some issues with our regional and remote people being able to do that training in an accessible way. So some of our students would be travelling, say, from Halls Creek to Broome, and to be able to do those 2 units separately, that was a huge commitment of time. So initially we had a hybrid model where students would do the first unit, which is that knowledge and information unit. They would do it online, self-paced. Then we would go and deliver that second unit face-to-face. That worked reasonably well. We still have the issue for our regional and remote people that if they were travelling, that 1 day face-to-face would actually take them about 3 days to attend. And for our staff that was, say, from the country health, they would have 2 days of PD a year. And when you're spending 3 days out of the office, that equation just wasn't working for them. The other issue we had is you have, with an accredited course, you have to have assessment over time. So even though it was 1 day face-to-face, we would still have to have assessment over time. So we put our thinking caps on, and with something that happened a couple of years ago, everyone got a little bit better with the idea of virtual. We went to a virtual training model. Now, this has actually been working really well. So we put a lot of thinking into how to deliver this model, a lot of trial and error to make sure it actually worked. When I started in this role 14 years ago, there was no way I thought you'd be able to do a practical course online. That just did not make sense, did not equate, but it actually works really, really well. So the first unit is still self-paced online. People have support if they need the support. They ring me up. They have assessment over time. They have 3 months to complete it if they want. Some people complete it really quickly. Some people take full 3 months. And we have some people that just do that first unit, and that's still really valuable because that's the information and advice. Some people don't actually want to get their hands dirty, but they're more providing information for the community about what types of car seats need to be used. The second unit we deliver virtually. So each student attends 2 small Zoom sessions. And in those Zoom sessions, some of the time they'll be sitting in the computer. Sometimes they're all clambering through their cars with their mobile phones. It is amazing what you can see. And the other nice thing is they actually have to really apply their learning. So we have a strong focus on check the manual, check the manual, check the manual. So I have got them looking up the manuals, showing me their manuals, climbing through the car, participants going, I haven't got ISOFIX. And when you actually look, they have, and they're really exploring and learning. Now, some students are better at asking the questions in front of others not so much. So we finally have a one-on-one session with each of them. And that one-on-one session, I can really assess whether they actually know their stuff, and they can ask me questions that potentially they didn't feel comfortable to ask in the group session. The nice thing, I think some people have that thought that I get away scot-free with my time. I do it online, nice and quick, but they're actually getting a lot more of me than they did in the old face-to-face one-day session. So they get an hour and a half one-on-one session with me, plus the 2 Zoom sessions, which are 4.5 hours each. So they actually get a considerably larger amount of time to practice and learn those skills. It's available statewide. So we are now getting registrations from the remotest of communities that would never have access to training before. It's available monthly, so anyone from around the state can access this training every month. And we're also getting reduced out of office time for the students, so they're not having to travel for a day, pay for accommodation, pay for another night's accommodation, and then travel back. So it's actually working really well from that side. We also found with the old method, so we would probably be able to go up to the Kimberley, say, once every 2 years. Now, and for staff up in the Kimberley, the idea of going, I need 5 people to get trained in my organisation, having them all out of the office on that same day is not practical. So managers can actually plan and stagger their staff's participation in the training, which is working really well. Now, in preparation for this session today, I had a look at how the participation spread has changed. So in the blue, that was the old hybrid model. In the purple, that's the new virtual online model. The really, really nice thing to see is that for regions like Goldfields, Esperance, Midwest, Pilbara and the Great Southern, there's been a huge increase in those regions of people registering. Also, what's good to see is that Metro hasn't dropped off. So we've still got a large number of people attending from Metro. Oh, no. To be honest, so these were taken from a similar period of time. In the earlier period, we had a very, very active road safety advisor up in Gascoyne. And before she retired, she did a lot of work up in the Gascoyne, and I think that's where the change has been. But that being said, this is really useful for us to know where to target some of our efforts. Okay, so training done. The next thing we get to do is look after the network of Type 1 fitters. So these aren't just the people that WALGA Roadwise trains, these are the people that any other RTO trains. So, and in Western Australia. So as I said before, Type 1 fitters, they don't just provide the installation and inspections, they also provide advice and knowledge. They're either public, so they're the people that are listed on our website, or they are private. So we have fitters from the Department of Communities, fitters who just provide a service for their own organisation. So there are a lot more fitters across the state than look on the website. They can either provide free or do it as a fee for service. Now I had a look, this is 2024 data again, at the checking forms we received on the different types of installations that they're doing. And what you can see is the vast majority are for your rearward facing kids, so your babies. So they're your capsules and your rearward facing convertibles. Then you go to your forward facing with internal harness, and you've got about 1/3 of them being inspected or installed. And then this drops significantly again to your booster seats or your external harness seats. I then took just the inspections, so not the installations, and had a look at what the common errors were. And again, these are from 2024. So on a whole, about 1/3 of them had 1 or more errors. And the the vast majority were either your top tether issues, so that was top tether twists, things like that, seatbelt issues with seatbelt twists and issues with the seatbelt pathway, and also gated buckle issues. So that's also a device that goes on the seatbelt. So I thought I'd actually then have a look at, we looked at the quantity of different types of child car seats being fitted. I thought I'd see, is there actually a difference in the proportion of those that have errors? And what I found is with your rearward facing seats, over half of them had errors. This then dropped to approximately 25% with your forward facing internal harness seats, and then dropped again to probably around 20% for your booster seats or your ones with external harnesses. I thought that was quite interesting, particularly when we looked at the proportion getting checked by our type 1 fitters. Finally, and I apologise for how old this photo is, so if anyone knows anyone in this photo, I apologise. But the other thing we do is we try really hard with the knowledge sharing to ensure that there's one consistent message. So we have regional road safety advisors that work with local governments across the state, and that's really essential in ensuring anything they do is following best practice and is evidence-based. And I'm also on the Child Car Restraint Industry Advisory Group with people like Nigel and Rachel and Miriam online. And we really work together to ensure that there's one consistent message going out to the community.
Are there any questions?
Just around the training. So
Yeah.
when it was in person,
Yes.
presumably then you were providing a range of sort of seats and restraints
Yes.
for them to work with.
We
How
get
does it
to
work
that.
when, do they have to source it all
Yeah.
themselves?
So for the second unit, the only cost to the student is for an accessory kit. So this isn't the child car seat question you just asked, but I also need to make sure they can use gated buckles, extension straps, things like that. So they pay $55 for an accessory kit. So I know when I'm doing the assessments, they've got those things. Most people that do this training will have access to child car seats. If they don't, that's where our wonderful regional road safety advisors come in, and they normally have contacts within that community that can line them up with seats. A lot easier for me if they're metro based because I have a warehouse with lots of seats in them. But our regional road safety advisors are fantastic with their contacts, and that's normally my next resort if they don't actually have a seat. I have had one participant who was super eager and went out and bought a whole pile, and I went, oh, just wait. And we have also had people that have gone to and got them where we never recommend people getting them from, but got them from your op shop just for the purpose of doing the training. So they've got them really, really cheaply, and they were happy to do that, and then they just donated them back.
With the errors, do you have a cheat sheet about how they can rectify these sort of things? Is that a common thing that?
Yeah, and so whenever they inspect a seat, they then fix them, and that's part of their training as to what they do. Do you mean for the community?
Yeah, for the community, because yeah, I was reading something. I think it was New South Wales had a journal article I was reading had a little glove box cheat sheet for errors or something like that, and it seemed to be a good cue for people in the community that might need some extra help, because quite often they're taking them out and putting them into other cars. It's not like they fit it once in a car.
And I must admit, that's one thing I think the WA model does very well. So we are very strong on, you don't just do the inspection and installation for the person. You'll need to actually show them the process, because children make messes, and then the parent needs to clean the seat, move the seat, pop it into the other parent's seat. So the idea is that they're actually being shown. We don't have a cheat sheet as such. Probably our closest thing would be something we developed during COVID, which was enabling people to check their own seats. So it was the types of things to look for. We always go back to the manuals. So if someone's unsure, the manuals are amazing guides, and a lot of the new seats coming out now have the QR code on the side that they just scan and they get the manual on their phone.
I think it was a QR code actually on
Yeah.
the sheet. I'll find it actually. I think
Yeah.
it was Australian College of Road Safety. It might have been in that journal that I was looking at. It was definitely New South Wales that was doing it. Yeah.
Anything else?
Do you think that it's interesting how the errors dropped off, you know, for the younger
Yes.
kids, you're getting 50% problems, with the older
Yeah.
kids, it's more like 20%. Do you think there's a sampling bias? Do you think that people who don't know, like, don't really know what they're doing are not coming back when they upgrade their kids as they get older? Or do you think it's, do you know what I mean? Do you see what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I do know what you mean. From anecdotal experience, I think the rearward facing seats are harder to install than the forward facing, and then again the boosters you can almost do with your eyes shut.
Yeah.
The rearward facing seats, there are a lot more issues with recline and extension straps and different things like that. So my gut would be that the rearward facing seats are harder to install. I also think there is the possibility that by the time someone's child is 3, 4, they've also had a lot of experience with those seats, and so potentially have a better understanding of how to install.
Because I guess, you know, the smaller age ones are more likely to have the ISOFIX if your car's got it, which is
Yeah.
super easy to
Yeah.
use. But then if you go from that to, say, a booster
Yeah.
that has to use the seatbelt,
Yeah.
you might never have been trained on that, but you think you know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah,
And especially those little, I think you're talking about those little buckle, what did you call them?
the gated buckles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the gated buckle. So again, yeah, as you said, if you're using ISOFIX, you don't need to use one of those. I think gated buckles are probably something that a parent would find quite difficult to use correctly. And that was interesting that was one of the main errors. Yeah. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Tammie. Much. So just before I forget, we might ask the presenters to, if they're ready to share their slide decks. If not, then just let me know and that's fine. Otherwise, the session is being recorded. Look back at it. Cool. So our next speaker is Padraig McAlpine from the Department of Transport. He'll be talking about the Type 2 child car restraint fitting and compliance in WA. So Padraig has been with the Vehicle Safety and Standards section of the DOT for almost 7 years. After several years working as a qualified heavy diesel mechanic for companies such as Brooks and Isuzu, he has worked within various technical roles and is currently the acting manager of Vehicle Safety and Standards, where he has found a passion in interpreting technical vehicle standards and legislation, which led him to studying law at Murdoch University. Padraig has 2 children and a wife at home. His son was diagnosed with autism and ADHD over a year ago. With that has come many roads he never thought he would face, granting Padraig a unique insight into some of the challenges faced by many people when the typical ways of doing things doesn't work for an individual. Thanks.
Thank you. And yeah, feel free to call me Paddy, it's a bit easier. So I was hoping to come up here and I want to give a snapshot of, I guess, an area that has a lot of variations in it. So obviously we're talking about non-standard restraints. These are normally for people with disabilities in that sort of field. So one size doesn't fit all, and we've seen that quite a lot. We've seen a lot of variations. I was hoping to be able to come up here and make it a lot clearer for you, but last week I found that legislation had actually changed a bit, and wording had actually changed the processes we did a bit in some areas. So I spoke to Rachel and I was like, you know, things have changed now. I'm not exactly 100% sure what is going to happen in the future. She's asked me to come and give a snapshot of what we're doing. Some things haven't changed, and I'll quickly talk about that. But then I'll say hopefully what we're going to do in the future. But this is just meant to be a snapshot. So I'm happy for any questions either through or at the end, but or outside of this session if need be. I've got an email address, but it can be quite varied. So I don't want anyone to think this is going to cover everything at all, because it just couldn't. There you go. So just a quick snapshot of the law. So obviously federally, vehicles have to come in, have to meet a certain standard. Once they're first time licensed, it comes up down to the state. So obviously each state's going to have differences in their legislation and how they go about doing these modifications or exemptions. So, so for ours, probably traffic and security fasteners, this is the area that's actually become a bit different recently. So just sorry, excuse me. Yeah, so just to give a basic understanding, so the restraints have come into the country a certain way, comes to the state, someone needs it varied. That's kind of where we're at now. So, and that's where we kind of come in our section. So it's kind of split into two sections. You've got under 16-year-olds and over 16-year-olds. That's kind of how we defined it. So a couple of years ago, DOT put out a non-standard restraint general exemption. This meant that you don't need a specific exemption for a child or under 16 user. All that is required is an advice to parents form, or advice to parents client form as well, which is found in Australian standard, which you do have to pay for. But I don't know, there's a website called the McAlpine, which is federal government, it's quasi-government, who have created their own for people to use free of charge. So I recommend looking at that website as well. A lot of information on there for non-standard restraints. So all you need, so if someone wants to use it, all they need to do is carry those two things, carry it in the vehicle, whichever vehicle, it's not vehicle specific, it's client specific. Just carry it around with them, and they're free to use it. I also recommend carrying the general exemption around in case there are some on-road enforcement officers who aren't too sure of the legalities. But I've never really heard of that happening. I know for the police, they're actually quite good with that sort of thing. They're understanding and kind of just let that go. If you go on our website, the DOT website, which is also newly updated, so there's a lot of new updates in the last week I can catch up on. If you go into the search function and just put in restraint exemption, come up with the general exemption. Really, I found that was the easy way to do it. If you're interested, and that explains the law and what you need to do. I won't go into that one too much because I think it's quite clear for that bit. So I just thought I'd show some of the pictures of some of the non-standard restraints, which we see more regularly. So these are normally, these would be prescribed by normally OTs and doctors and medical professionals. I don't know how many people here that interact with those sort of areas much, but these are quite common ones. What I did want to point out for later, and you'll see why, it is with the best vest and the easy on vest. Particularly the best vest, you'll see where the sash part goes. See how it's got actually two clips, so one on your right side and then up on the shoulder. And I'll point that out because I'll explain something a bit later, which is where I think people need to be mindful of how these devices can interact with the seatbelts. So that's the biggest thing we're looking at. In VSS, we're happy to help people out as much as possible with these sort of devices when that's needed, because we understand that it's just sometimes an extra burden to some of these people to have to go through another process of going exemption and going through the OT and getting it signed off to use these. So what we want to do is we never say no. We just need to make sure that everything has been looked at properly, and I'll show you in a bit why. So these two in particular, you can see it's quite loose on the body. Can be an issue, and it's something that needs to be thought of if anyone's in that sort of area of prescribing or working with people who may use it. And the seatbelt extender, also just keep that in mind for a video later on I'll show you, which will explain that a bit. So this one, non-standard restraints for users 16 or older, this is where it now gets a bit cloudy. So as I said, we used to say that but the way the law is written has to be properly adjusted and securely fastened. We took that very generally to say, as a manufacturer intended. So anything you do to that seatbelt, extenders, buckle guards, the vest, anything like that, it's interacted with how the manufacturer did it. We're given exemption as provided for in the traffic code 2000. The changes now have actually defined what properly adjusted and securely fastened are, meaning that has to go across, depending on the vehicle, has to go across your shoulder, down to your hip, and tightly onto your hips. So that has kind of changed it a bit, and it's harder for us to exempt against that now, because as you saw, the best vest and easy on and that seatbelt extender, it may not actually interact where it wouldn't change that direction, but it may have effects on it. So right now we're looking into what we're going to be doing to make this easier. I won't go into it too much because one, I haven't thought about it too much, but two, I don't want to get anything into people's heads and then they'd have to change it. So, but we are working on that, and I'll provide details later, the email address that people can contact. And I was thinking on the way here, or even for everyone listening here and for people who are invited, I'll, once I have some more information, I'll send it to Rachel, who can send it out to everyone to kind of clarify our position. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. It may make it easier for us. I'm hoping that it just, as long as it's safe, is from our position of vehicle safety and standards. We just want to make sure that whatever process is in place is as safe as can be. So I won't go much into that one too much right now. But if anyone's got any questions, if I need something right now, then feel free to ask me whenever. I'll talk to you about that. The other one, Rachel, I'm going to talk about is devices for pregnancy. So it seems to have come out in the news recently, actually, a bit more about these sort of devices which are designed primarily to take the risk or perceived risk off the belly from that lower strap. So we haven't seen too many in our section. I've only seen a couple, which is the tummy shield, which is both the right and left picture. So basically, it's just designed just to deviate the lap part of the belt away from the stomach. You know, this is based on some people feeling. I haven't seen any of the proper research yet to say that there's an increase to the unborn baby in the event of a crash should they be wearing a normal lap sash belt. There have been stories of people being in quite low accidents and babies either actually dying or having brain damage or other sort of injuries. The research is very sketchy in this area, so I definitely want to make that clear that I'm not saying that these are. There is a risk. There isn't a risk. I don't know. I wouldn't know. One thing we would definitely want to say is that we're not medical experts in our area, so I don't like getting too into that. But I have read one. I've only been able to find one testing document that was provided to me, and it was actually done in Sweden, I think it was. So I translated to English moderately well. I think they tested about 4 or 5 devices, different devices you could find online, and none of them passed. They all actually made it worse because of the slack in the belt. So obviously there was more forward movement, there was more backwards movement, or lateral movement. It didn't do what it was meant to do. And one was so bad that they wouldn't test it because they were worried about damaging the dummy. I don't know which one that is. I didn't want to show you anything from that document because I don't know the background of it, but it's just interesting to see that's the only one I've been able to find, and it didn't say that it was great. So as I mentioned there, if someone or you talk to someone who's wanting to use it, I would recommend that they talk to their GP first and kind of get that medical background and medical reasoning first, and then come to us. Or if they're prepared to, the doctor can give a medical certificate under law to stating that the person doesn't have to wear a seatbelt at all. So they may be willing to provide that, and then you could just wear one as you see fit, or sorry, as they see fit. Again, very open-ended area, and one that I wouldn't want to be telling people what to do personally myself because of the risks. I know that so my sister-in-law actually used the tummy shield because she was worried about it. And after speaking to her and my wife at that time, they said that we were worried about, particularly the tummy shield, in a crash of cutting off circulation to the legs or doing some damage down there. They both agreed, and everyone else I spoke to around that period of time, was that they would risk it for their unborn child. So it's a very hard area where you get emotions and that sort of thing, and then the law is very unclear. So I just want people to be aware of that sort of area because I've noticed in the news that it is coming up more. So it's just a snapshot, but people have questions, then I'd recommend just emailing us as a department or talking to the GP first before providing any information. And then we can talk to them and we'll tell them about the law and the risks and that sort of thing. You know, like I said, the whole area of this is just a snapshot because it's just so varied. Some of these devices, we've even been talked with someone who couldn't sit down for a medical reason, and we were looking at trying to get them to stand up with a restraint in the vehicle as it moved. Now, I know people, you say that, and people go, oh, you know, that sounds dangerous, and it is. But she couldn't go more than 20 minutes outside of her area. And she wanted to travel down south because her life was being impacted. Again, this comes into the emotional and what that person wants. And DOT's view is that these people need to be able to travel as well. You know, they have the same right to be able to go around. There's a very mixed area where we might need to get engineers in place to have a look at this. They may need to know the risks. We have to do quite a bit of research and talking with different sections before we can just say, yeah, that's fine. So always feel free to come to us with questions about this, because this is what sort of thing that we like and we work on. We prefer people to be safe out there, then I'll just wing it because I'm not too sure. Next, so obviously, as you see, like based on that, like the tummy shield and people's views, technology is always changing as well. And it's always good to be mindful of the technology in vehicles. So I've got a couple of videos that I did see on YouTube, which I'll show you in a minute, of what some of these new technologies may be coming in. Some are already out, some may not be in Australia. There's going to be future ones coming out. It's kind of very hard to know what's happening. But if you're in the kind of field of prescribing these or looking at talking to people, be very mindful of the vehicle itself, even though they're not vehicle specific, these devices, not all of them anyway. The person who is, I guess, the driver who's going to be ultimately responsible needs to be aware of the vehicle itself and how it may interact with the prescribed restraints. So I don't know if it's not right. This is just one I found on YouTube. Sign in if I'm not involved. I don't know what that means. Okay, maybe I can't do that one. Okay, let's sign in to confirm that you're not involved. Sorry. Okay, well, I can just describe now, and then you guys can have a look at it if you want. Since apparently I must make sure I'm not on board. I know I got a monotone board, but I didn't think it was that bad. So basically, I'll just go through it. So explosive seatbelt pretension. So the video is going to show that when there's a collision, that this is obviously staged. That seatbelt actually retracts explosively in point whatever of a second, just bang, it's gone. So so there's quite a few explosives now becoming normal in seatbelts. So we have pretensioners that will explode to pull it back down. Everything is designed to try and reduce the gap your clothes gives you, or just slight movement as quickly as possible before I guess I'll say the main impact occurs. I'm not an expert on impacts at all. Just obviously you got like just when it hits, these things will go off, and then you got the airbag, you got the deployment of everything else. And obviously airbags are designed to be deployed when you're in a certain distance away from the vehicle. So this is trying to help say, okay, you're going to be here, airbag's going to be here, your face is going to go at this speed. Try and reduce the amount of damage from the seatbelts. So, obviously they save lives and do a good job of it, but they do cause some injury. That's just unfortunately the nature of it. The next one, the better one, is actually an airbag in the seatbelt. So as soon as you impact the seatbelt, rips open and the airbag comes out. So going back to those pictures previously of the Best Vest and the EasyGo, you can see how even though it was under law, it's defined and it still meets the standards, it's still got clips on it, it's still moved position, it's still looser on the body. So how it goes, and the seatbelt extender and even buckle guards, how would that interact with the explosive seatbelt receiver when it goes back down? Is it going to get clogged? Is it going to keep it loose? Or is this the inflatable seatbelt? Those two, the Best Vest and the EasyGo, are really good examples, but some of them will have the seatbelt in very different positions on the body, depending on how this person may need the torsional support. It's potential for, if you go into a vehicle like that, is that going to blow up in their face? Is that going to rip something apart? Is that going to push more pressure on their stomach? So with all the new technology, it needs to be under like forefront of people's minds that, okay, this actually may severely impact the client more than if they didn't use it. It's very hard to tell what's going to be coming up, and not everything is spruiked in the media. Look how great this is. So it's always to be mindful. Look at talk to the manufacturer if you need to. Look at the handbooks. Google it. YouTube it. We find quite a good bunch of stuff just on YouTube, just saying kind of the future of safety. So as I said, we're working on the new process, and I'll find a way to make sure everyone gets to it. I'll put it on the website too. Also, but main thing is to talk to healthcare professionals if you're in that sphere, or if you know somebody's in that sphere. OTs are very good at it. They're really pushing hard for more consistency across the country, which I support personally. Like I said, each state is different, but this is an area where I think it just needs to be consistent for everyone, because it's all about safety at the end of the day. It's not about, these people aren't modifying or changing vehicles for the fun of it. They have to do it. They don't want to have to do it. And then my email address there, which I have. But hopefully, if you get the slides and you can watch the videos, I might explain a bit more. But that's pretty much all I got. I'm happy to answer questions. Like I said, it's just meant to be a snapshot. So if you've got more in-depth things, please feel free at a later date to email big paragraphs if you want, and we can talk about that. Or I'm happy to just come out and talk to people if required and that sort of thing. So thank you for listening.
Any questions?
Just in terms of the actual installation process, so who actually install these, and if someone lives in a quite remote area, for example, how do they ensure that they are using these correctly?
It'd be more based on the medical professional who will be doing it, because some of these are so tailored that it will be a certain way, and the OTs, as part of their risk assessment, have to go through all that sort of stuff and have to impart the knowledge. So it is an area where it is quite open. Like, we don't really have like the type 1 fitters. There are some type 2 there are modifiers who work in this area of modifications for people with disabilities and medical issues or reasons, and they're very good with that sort of thing too. But it is quite an area that doesn't have set rules or standards or things to follow as such, because sometimes it's, like I said, it's not one size fits all. So sometimes the stuff Tammie said may work very well, and in other times it just won't. Some people have to lie down. They have to find a way to lie down. They want to install a bed so they can lie down. It's very, the document will be too big, and I would never be able to cover everything, because the next day you get when you're like, well, I never thought of that. So it doesn't really help your question, I know, but it's very. Yeah, if you got it.
I actually went to an expo that Nigel suggested the other day and spoke to the distributors. And they said one issue they're having regionally is that they like their distributors to go up and fit the seats. And they had seats in the warehouse for 1 or 2 years before people would get up to the regions. So we've had a chat about whether some type 1 fitters can be upskilled and potentially alleviate that for your really regional people, because some of the distributors are getting quite, they are the ones that want to actually go up and do the fitting of certain seats.
You were talking about the pregnancy devices. If those aren't necessarily evidence-based, what is the recommended way to wear a seatbelt in pregnancy?
I don't know if I want to answer that. My recommendation would be to talk to the manufacturer and talk to the healthcare professionals. I know it sounds like I'm just passing off the thing. It's just it's so various. If we said they follow what they do, and then someone gets injured or killed, then it comes back to us. And if we say no, follow this, and something happens, we're kind of in the middle where whatever he says is going to be used against us. So I would talk to the people who are experts in that field. Talk to the manufacturer. Do you recommend I use this? No, I don't. Okay, just because the GP say no, I don't think you should do that, because I know your medical history and I know that maybe actually cause more issues. And then that's where it comes hard, because then it's also the emotional person, the emotionalness of that person who goes, no, I won't do anything to protect this baby. And I forego any risk to myself. And so I wouldn't want to answer that too solidly, but yeah,
Right, just to assist with some of the questions with that. With the seatbelt, the intention for seatbelts is to maximise the time from when the accidents happen to when you stop moving. So that's why airbags come in, because they slow your deceleration down. And same with the seatbelt. We're talking about pre-tension, as Paddy was talking about. They came out in the 90s. Basically, they shorten the seatbelt by 10 centimetres when the airbags go off and pulls you back into your seat. Same with headrests, they were put in there to stop whiplash going back. The intent of a seatbelt, they will have generic stretch in the belt themselves to that's why you need it hard against your body and then allow it to stretch once your body puts force on it. But it has to be on the bony part of your body. So that's why it comes across your collarbone, your rib cage, and then across your hip section. And obviously with pregnant women, the hip section becomes an issue. But if you put it over your legs, it will stop you to a degree, but then you have to worry about submarining and how that extra load will, because your legs are quite meaty, and that will push down into your legs. So that will give you the extra movement, which may be the difference between hitting the thing in front of you or missing. So it is a bit of a fine line. But like what Paddy says, the best way is to talk to a professional. But I think further research may need to go into it.
Only that Tammie Deshon was rated. They said they tested to Australian design rule standards. But they reckon they passed it. I don't know exactly how they tested it. All the other ones didn't have any sort of thing. They were an Australian standard. They didn't seem to have any other standard. So in some instances, those devices were actually snapped off, I think, in the testing as well. Of course, that would add to the looseness of the belt and not anything. I just saw that movement from Road Safety Commission actually says they do provide advice in line with that too. So speak to Road Safety Commission too, as actually comes under their codes, as we've got a little bit to deal with the exemption itself from a mechanical point of view. And that's why I say we don't try and get into the health or medical bit, because we're not professionals in that area at all. We go on the advice of OTs and doctors in that circumstance to say, yeah, I'm satisfied that you guys have looked at it. We're happy to provide the exemption, depending what happens in the future anyway. Yeah, if you have any other questions come up, because normally people find out they think of it later, feel free to email through and or something like that. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you for the late notice. I know it was a bit stressful with the changes in the legislation. So next we have Melanie Suitor, who is online from Parks. Hi, Mel. Parks, Forbes and Lachlan Shire councils. So she's going to be talking to us about her experiences with child restraint fitting and recycling. So just a bit about Mel. With 23 years experience across Parks, Forbes and Lachlan Shire councils, Melanie is passionate about road safety and collaboration. She specialises in project management, media liaison, grant writing, crash data analysis and community engagement. Melanie values the impact her work has on her communities. So thanks, Mel. I'm not sure if you wanted to share your slides.
Are mine in the slide deck?
Yes, they are. So we can do it. Yep.
Let me see if I can. Oh yeah, there you go. I can forward it. Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me. I guess my presentation is split into sort of 3 sections. So first up, I just want to do a bit of scene setting, I guess, about my operating environment and my experience on the ground. Secondly, I wanted to talk to you, I guess, about some of those errors that Tammie was talking about earlier. So what I see when I'm out doing child restraint checks. And then finally, I wanted to talk to you about some work I'm doing with the college through the Future Leaders program about recycling of child restraints. So here we go. So if you've never been out to Parks, Forbes or Lachlan, we're located in the Central West region of New South Wales. So if you're looking at that grey map of the state, it's that sort of more darker grey bit. And my 3 councils are the ones that are closest to the text. That sort of olive green, the orange and the lime green are my 3. We've got a combined population of about 30,000 people, a really extensive road network with nearly 8,000 kilometres of road, and we're incredibly car dependent. There's not a lot of public transport out where we are. Our major industries, not surprising where we are, is agriculture, and then healthcare, mining, retail and public administration. So my experience in this space is that I have 2 children of my own that are in booster seats. So Felicity's 9 and Imogen is 6. They're both in boosted anchored booster seats. Felicity is asking pretty much every day for me to check where her shoulder markers are so that she can get out of it. So I'm living it. I did my child restraint fitting training in New South Wales in 2023, so that's the picture in the middle. So our system sounds very similar to how it's set up in WA. So level 1 fitters can install, inspect and adjust child restraints. So I'm a level 1 fitter, and then level 2 fitters also do anchorage points as well on top of the fitting and inspecting. So over the last decade, I have lost count of how many car seats I've actually had a look at, but I did want to show you some photos, I guess, of what I'm seeing. So these are the types of errors that Tammie was talking about a bit earlier. So we have an annual child restraint project as part of our action plan, which comprises of checking days. So we do these twice a year in our bigger centres. We also run some online workshops where we talk about what those national child restraint laws are and the best practice in terms of fitting and installing child restraints. We've just started to roll out info sessions with local non-for-profit organisations that work with children and transport children. So they're collecting that same information that we would deliver in the workshops, but we're also showing them how to fit their car seats into their vehicles. And then I spend a heap of time just ad hoc going to all sorts of events where parents and grandparents are. So mums groups or play groups, rhyme time and story time at the library. I've got a prayer walk next week in Condobolin, and we go to events where there's lots of families. So anywhere that there's lots of families gathering, you will usually see me there with all of my car seats, offering car seat checks. And then I just wanted to plug this out here because I know you're having brainstorming a bit later about the legislation. So here's some stuff I'm thinking about moving forward, I guess, based on my experience in this space. So a couple of touch points of how do we reach these groups to better educate them about child restraint. So grandparents is a huge cohort that we don't see a lot of coming through our checking days or interacting with us in any of these activities that we do. And then the other group we really haven't captured yet is expectant parents. So this is a very cluttered space in New South Wales. There's lots that health are talking to parents about before they have their babies. Child restraints is not one of the things that's part of that conversation. And yeah, I'd love to have a conversation about how we can include that. And then it's a couple of issues that have emerged over the last 12 months, I guess. I've had a lot of conversations lately about when children can graduate into an adult seatbelt. And so a lot of people are really stuck on you've got to be 7 or 145 centimetres tall. And we know it's more than that in New South Wales, you need to also pass this 5-step test as well. But this is for each vehicle that you're sitting in. So we have to have this conversation to say, well, you might pass the 5-step test in my car, but you might not pass it in Dad's car just because of the geometry of the seat. So some more work in that space. And then second-hand restraints is a massive, this has just blossomed because there's so many seats out there that people still want to love, I guess, and they've got life left in them. But how do we provide some advice about how to do that safely? I don't have the answers to those. I'm just flagging them as issues. So moving on into the actual common fitting errors that I see. So somewhere between probably 50 and 90% of the child restraints that we inspect at checking days are incorrectly fitted. And I wanted to just touch on this research that was published last year from Julie Brown's team out of Neura in Sydney. So this was some research that they had done 10 years after the national legislation had come into force. They were looking at child restraint use, particularly in Sydney. So this happened just around when COVID was happening. And what they found was that the age-appropriate use of restraints was actually really great, and it had increased from the pre-observation period for when the research happened, but that common fitting errors had not increased, had not benefited, I guess, from that as well. So they were still saying a really large amount of common fitting errors across child restraints. And the table that you can see on your slide is from that research. So they did try to do some work into splitting them into a minor error or a more serious error. So if a child was actually sitting in a seat with this error, would they have a serious injury or a minor injury as a result of these errors? And these are the types of things that there was a question earlier about what are we looking for when we do checks of child restraint. So these are the types of things that we're looking for and fixing before we let that car go, and having an education session with the family to say this is why it's important that we fix this. So now I'm just going to run you through some photos that I've taken, and some of these are from my local fitters as well. So issues with anchorage points and top tether straps. So this is a photo from, this was a rearward forward facing converter seat. So the family had just turned it around from rearward to forward. And you know how much excess tether strap there is? They had just not tightened it up. They didn't realise that they needed to. I've also seen top tether straps that are too tight. So the family had fed it over the top of the headrest and pulled it so tight that there was actually a big indent in the top of the headrest because it was so tight. We've also seen other materials being used instead of extension straps, such as rope, hockey straps, handbag straps have all been used instead of an extension. And then I've got a couple more photos to show you of those other things. But before I did that, I just wanted to flag this one. So this is the anchorage system on a Toyota Hilux. When this first came through our checking days, I did not know what I was looking at, so I did have to get the instruction manual out. We in New South Wales don't do, I guess, ongoing professional training for the fitters, so I'd really like to see something like that happen, so that when something like this comes through, you know what you're looking at, or if there's a change to something on a child restraint. I've got a photo in a minute of something like that. You can actually know what you're dealing with. So this actually feeds through that webbing on the first photo. The top tether goes through the webbing and then it goes into the middle position and connects to the top anchorage point in the middle. So very different than any other top tether that you would normally see. Still talking about top tethers and issues. So the larger of the photos is that twisted top tether strap. It's incredibly common, and so you just undo it, fix it, and then do it back up. And the smaller photo just shows some really ingenious things that some families do when they're fitting and not reading the instructions. So that top tether is coming through sort of that pop out bit in the middle of the seats to connect to the top tether instead of going up and over the back of the seat. We see that all the time. Ingenious things like that all the time. This is that new thing I was talking about, that it would be great if we could see some of these technologies or changes to car seats, innovations in car seats as they come through. So this is called a smart guide. And so this is a rearward facing child restraint. So that's the top tether strap that's going through the guide to make it easier for parents to actually place their baby into the restraint without having to try to post it over or under the top tether strap. I'm not sure what the testing of this looks like, but it would be really great, like I said, to have this sort of professional training ongoing so that you're sort of seeing these things and know what to do with them when they come through. In terms of the harness, we see twisted harnesses, we see shoulder straps that need adjusting. So it's very common for them to be coming from below the shoulders. So we're always moving them to level with or just above the shoulders. And then we see seat belts that are routed through the harness. So that first photo, I don't know how well you can see it on your screens, but the sort of light grey is the harness, and it is somehow wrapped around the actual seat belt. And then the second photo, you can see sort of a silver buckle in the middle. That is the harness, the clasp that the harness straps attached to. So this one is correctly fitted because the seatbelt's on the bottom of the restraint, but we always, I shouldn't say always, we sometimes see this threaded through the actual, between that clasp and the actual back of the restraint, which makes the harness incredibly difficult for the child to actually use. Isofix, super easy to fit, but we still see mistakes. Usually it's because it's not tight enough, so they haven't checked that the indicator is in the green to mean it's good and tight. It might be tight on one side but not the other side. We have seen one connector fitted and then the other connector not fitted. But the most common issue that we'd see is Isofix and the seatbelt both connected at the same time. So that's what's the photo. The front is the seatbelt, the back is the Isofix. Not a huge problem in terms of if it was in a crash because it's still anchored to the vehicle. It is a problem if you want to get it out quickly because it's anchored twice to the vehicle. A lot of people do this because their seatbelt reminder or the alarm that goes off because you've got something in the back seat but it's not restrained goes off. So we would fit that seatbelt just flat across the back seat and still clasp it into the seatbelt to stop that alarm from going off but not attach it through the restraint. In terms of the seat belt use, lots of things go wrong here. Let's just walk through the photos. In the bottom corner, this wrong seatbelt path is used. So you can see it going through the yellow part, which is for forward-facing restraints rather than the blue for rearward-facing. The top photo in the corner, that's a twisted seatbelt. And then the blue car, that's also got a wrong seatbelt path. It's forward-facing but going through the rearward-facing path, but I don't know how well you can see it. There's a big white bit coming from where the seatbelt is. That's a piece of rope that the father had tied through the back of the restraint, and he had tied it onto luggage points in the rear of the vehicle. That's not as common, but definitely the wrong seatbelt path and twisted seatbelts are quite common. Seatbelt not tight enough is really common, and even when you hand tighten them, sometimes you still can't get them tight to stop that sideways movement. And Tammie was talking earlier about the gated buckle. So sometimes we would fit a gated buckle in that position. So I've got a couple of videos that I took yesterday in the car park. I don't know if these are going to play. Oh yeah, there you go. This is the not seatbelt, just the seatbelt without the buckle. So there's lots of sideways movement there. And this one on this side is with the gated buckle fitted. So the seatbelt's great. It's probably my photography that's rocking a bit as I'm trying to rock the seat. But yeah, the gated buckle is that. You can just see it there holding the seat, making the seatbelt a lap only as it goes through the back of the car seat. So you don't get that sideways movement. Oh, I don't want to play them again. And then the other really common errors that we see are stabilizing bars that are not used when it's in a rearward facing configuration when it's required to be used. So that's that sort of square rectangle that sits across the back seat. And then the other thing we see a lot is that they don't leave a gap between when the child, it's usually in rearward facing mode, when the child restraint's rearward and it's hard up against the back of the front seat. So we do like to see that gap as well. So that's it for fitting errors. Now I just really wanted to quickly tell you about some of the work I've been doing around recycling or learning about recycling. So I was lucky enough to be selected as one of the 4 future leaders in a pilot program being run by the college this year, and being able to access all of the membership and learn a lot about our passion project. So obviously my passion project's child restraints. And when I was thinking about local government in this space, I realised that not all local governments get their hands dirty as much as I do, but something that we do all have in common is waste. So we all look after waste facilities, and child restraints do create a lot of waste. So on average, and here's the data, this is still very much a work in progress, and if anyone has any connections that you'd love me to chat to, I would love to do this. But this is what I've learnt so far. So there's 1.5 million new child restraints purchased every year in Australia, all the way from capsules right through to booster seats. But 200,000 of those are disposed of each year, either because they're expired, so they're over their 10-year lifespan, they're unsafe because they've been involved in a crash, or because they're unwanted because the child has grown out of them. So those seats that are unwanted, but they're still within their expiry date, or they haven't been involved in a crash, so they're still safe. What do we do with all of those? There's a huge market for those seats rather than them going to landfill. So there are some charities that will take child restraints that are no longer needed, still safe and not expired, and they will go through an integrity check by a child restraint fitter, but not every charity does that. And this is why a lot of these seats find their way into that secondhand market that I was talking about earlier. Those that can't get rid of them, or it all ends up in landfill. So it's about 900 tonnes going to landfill every year, and about 80% of the components of child restraints can actually be recycled, so the plastic and the fabrics. So I'm just going to touch on a few of the child restraint recycling trials that I've heard about, and like I said, really happy to be pointed in the right direction if you have any more contacts. So this is the first one that I could find. So Seek Care. This was run by a company called Equilibrium, and it started in 2017 as a trial in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. And in that first year, they recycled nearly 2,000 child restraints, which is equivalent to about 10 tonnes of material. They sort of go dark for a little while, but then I found them again in 2022 with 25 collection sites across those 3 states, and then 60 permanent sites in 2023. They did announce a trial of doing child restraint recycling in Western Australia in 2023, but I couldn't find any further details about that. So maybe one of you lovely people might have a lead in that space. And they also talked about planning to expand the trial nationally in 2024. What I have found through some of my contacts is that the company doesn't operate anymore, which is why this has stopped running. Over to South Australia, so the Royal Automotive Association do child restraint recycling. They started in 2020 at the Child Safety Centre at Mile End. It costs you $5 to drop your child restraint off, and then members receive a $5 voucher to use on purchasing their next child restraint. In 2022, they recycled 1,250 child restraints, and that material that's recovered is ground up and then used as low emission fuels. In Victoria, baby bunting is in the middle of the moment of an 18-month trial that ends at the end of this year. Their aim is to recycle 2,400 child restraints, which is approximately 12 tonnes of material. So there are 8 sites that are currently collecting child restraints. So it's free to drop off your child restraint if you bought it from Baby Bunting. Otherwise, it costs you $15. And they're recycling the material into, as you can see in the bottom photo, plastic pots and playground equipment. And then finally, Baby Care in New South Wales. So they started a trial last year. They have recycled almost 400 child restraints in 12 months, and that's about 4 tonnes of material. They've collected these restraints from all over the place, so Port Macquarie, Bathurst, Canberra, Crash Lab in Sydney, as well as some from Britax in Victoria. But I guess the big momentum push was Georges River Council. So they received some funding from the EPA through their local government waste solution fund to set up a trial for child restraint recycling, and they did that in partnership with Baby Care. So Baby Care ship all of the restraints to their headquarters in Sydney, and then they are manually disassembled into their core components. Which you can see there in the photo, that's all the plastic. And depending on the make of seat, this could take anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour. What they did tell me is that all of the plastic that they have recycled is being made into those baby on board signs that you can see on the slide. And that's as much as I've got, but I'm really happy to take some questions, or if you've got any leads for me to chat to, I'm happy to do that too.
Are there any questions?
Hi, it's Tammie. I guess I was really excited to hear about the different programs for recycling, and I know it's something in Western Australia we've been discussing and are really keen to look at. I know there has been some discussion, I'm looking at Nigel, about the use of secondhand seats, and people obviously have different views on that, but as you pointed out, ones that had been in a crash and ones that were less than 10 years of age. But I think any sort of advice or direction that we could have in recycling in WA would be fantastic, because yeah, the seat care one just it fell in a heap, and I think people were notified about a week before the trial ended, which wasn't useful. There wasn't much of a question there, more sorry.
But I'm agreeing, I'm nodding. Yep.
Yeah. But just more thank you, that was really interesting.
Pleasure.
Mel, it's Ritha.
Yep.
Right at the back here. What with your Future Leaders project, how does that, what's the plan? Do you guys have to write up a thing and then send it through the college, or what does it look like from the Future Leaders point of view?
Really good question. We're not really sure. So we've got a meeting tomorrow to have a chat about, well, what do we do now that we've gone out and made some connections and done some research? We definitely will be presenting back some of our findings at the conference in Perth. But what more broadly happens from there, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, okay, that'd be really, I think that'd be interesting to find out, because I think there'd be other people outside of this room who would be interested. And it sounds like there's probably a national need for some sort of, as with everything, consistency in this space in particular.
Totally.
So much, Mel. It'd be really interesting to see how your findings with the fitting align with some of Tammie's stats there. So moving on. So I'll be sharing the results now of one of the surveys that we ran last year on child restraints. So just a bit about me. I'm a public policy advisor here within the Social and Community Impact Division at RAC. I've got 7 years experience in road safety, having begun at R, which is now MTRO, as a road safety professional in 2018. In 2020, I worked as a research officer at the WA Centre for Road Safety Research, and then I moved on to RAC, and I'm also a committee member on the WA ACRES chapter. So just for a bit of an RAC context, so RAC has a series of 2030 vision end states. They provide the strategic direction around where we want to get to for each of our 3 impact areas. These are safe, sustainable and connected. And we have a social impact metric, which you can see on the right side, which helps us track progress around the things we're trying to impact. And as part of this, we've set targets under the safe area, which will be changing soon, but it's to halve the rate of people being killed and seriously injured by 2025 from a 2020 base. And in order to meet these targets, we need to take a safe system approach. So that's looking at safe road users, safe speeds, safer vehicles and safer roads and roadsides. You might also be interested in reading our social and community impact report, which is on our website under the advocacy area, so the covers on the left. So as part of our policy work, we draw on a range of sources. So we have the opinions of our members, but we also develop our policies based on evidence and best practice and many other sources. So after doing some desktop research on child car restraint safety, we found that the current legislation isn't necessarily in line with what best practice is saying. And we wanted to better understand also our members' thoughts and experiences when it comes to child car restraints in vehicles, including their current understanding and opinions of the legislation, but also their experiences using child car restraints. So last year in July, we ran a short quiz that was, we invited 10,000 members to participate in. We ended up getting 948 responses, which was great response. And these are all people who have some kind of recent experience with child car restraints within the past 5 years. So it could be parents, grandparents, or caregivers. And the results were also post-weighted to be reflected of the overall member population. So we wanted to know people's familiarity with the current child car restraint legislation in WA, and also what they thought the legislation should be based on, whether it be age, size, or both. Currently, the legislation for when to transition a child to the next category of restraint, it's based primarily on age, with exceptions for size. But best practice is to base the time of transition on the size of the child. So we asked how familiar members were with the current legislation. We found that 44% were reasonably familiar, 32% were very or extremely familiar, and 23% were slightly or not at all familiar. And we also asked whether they thought that child restraint law should be based on age or size. 52% said both, age and size. 34% said just size, and a very small 9% said just age. Currently, the legislation allows babies to transition from rearward facing to forward facing at 6 months, but best practice supports increasing the transition age to allow more time for the baby's neck to strengthen. We asked whether members supported increasing this age requirement from the 6 months that it already is to around 12 months. 41% were unsure whether they thought this was a good idea. 40% supported it or strongly supported it. And then there was less opposition to it, 19%. We wanted to hone in a bit on the age groups that the caregivers had. So we looked at caregivers with at least one child aged under 6 months. And here, the unsure kind of mixed views did increase a bit to 44%. And we had a bit of a decrease in support to 38%, but also a decrease in opposition to 17%. So there were more people a bit unsure about this one. And then we looked at those with at least one child aged 6 months to under 4 years. So to 4 years. And here we saw a bit of a decrease in the mixed views, but there was an increase in the support. So there was 35% being unsure, but 47% supporting and 18% opposing. So there was a bit more of a support for increasing to 12 months among those with children aged 6 months to 4 years. Then we wanted to see what people thought about increasing that requirement from rear facing to forward facing even more. So from 6 months to 2 years instead of 12 months. And we found that there was 49% of people opposed that, 32% were unsure, and 20% supported. So there was quite a bit of opposition to increasing it by that much. And when we looked in at the age groups even further, so looking at people with at least one child aged under 6 months, there was even more opposition to it. There were more mixed views, and there was a decrease in support. So 52% opposed, 34% mixed views, and 14% supported. And when we looked at those with at least one child aged 6 months to 4 years, 47% opposed, which was a decrease. 27% had mixed views, which was also a decrease. But then we had more support for that. So 26% supported, which was more support for any of the other age groups we looked at. So currently the legislation allows children to transition to a seatbelt and a front seat at 7 years of age, but best practice says it's safer for children under 145 centimetres to use a booster seat, and they shouldn't transition to a front seat until at least 12 years. I'll talk more about the 5-step test later. So we asked whether members supported requiring all children under 145 centimetres in height to use a booster seat or other child restraint. So we had a bit more support for this. So there was 52% supporting this change, 34% had mixed views, and there wasn't a lot of opposition. So there was only 13% opposition to this. Then we also asked whether they support increasing the age requirement to be able to sit in the front seat from the current 7 years to 12 years. 40% of people supported this, 30% had mixed views, and 31% were opposed. So while there was more support for this, that it was sort of almost evenly spread between opposition and mixed views. And then the final legislation question we asked was about taxis and ride shares. So given taxis and ride shares generally have the same crash profiles as standard vehicles, best practice also says that child restraint should be required in taxis and ride share vehicles. So we asked whether members would support this requirement. And this was overwhelmingly the question that had the most support. So 59% supported having a requirement for child restraints in taxis and ride shares. 25% were unsure, and then 15% opposed. Okay, so we also asked about the 5-step test. So this has sort of been touched on before by Mel. So the 5-step test asks 5 questions. So it's, can the child sit with their back against the vehicle seat back? Do the child's knees bend in front of the edge of the seat? Does the sash belt sit across the middle of the shoulder? Is the lap belt sitting low across the hips, touching the thighs? And can the child stay seated like this for the whole trip? So we asked whether caregivers used the 5-step test to determine if their child was ready to transition to a regular vehicle seat and seatbelt. And 72% of people had never actually heard of the 5-step test. 19% had heard of it, 9% had heard of it but didn't use it. We were also interested in members' experiences with child restraint installation. So we asked whether they had their child restraints fitted professionally when first installed. 58% did not have their child restraints fitted professionally when first installed. 24% have their child restraints fitted professionally but not every time. And then 19% have their child restraints fitted professionally every time. We also asked about guidance. So what type of guidance did they receive when they were using a child restraint for the first time? So majority of people use the restraint manual or documentation, so 68%. Then the next most popular guidance was family and friends advice. So that was 32%. Then 29% was professional service, and online videos, Kids Safe and government guidelines were quite on par, between 20 and 25%. We were also interested to know what kind of child restraint types caregivers were using. So the most common for them to be using was a forward-facing seat with an inbuilt harness, followed by forward-facing seat with a regular seat belt, and then regular seat with seat belt, and then rear-facing seat with an inbuilt harness, and then a rear-facing capsule. But these aren't necessarily so useful without the context of how old their children are. So we looked at the age groups of the children that the caregivers had. So for this one, we looked at people with children under 6 months of age, but we found it was actually a really small sample size. So what we did is we included those who definitely had a child in that age bracket, but they also could have had a child in another age bracket. So looking at the first response, which is 54% of people said that their child was in a rear-facing capsule or child seat with inbuilt harness. That probably applies to the under 6 months, and then the other restraints probably applies to the 46%. And then we looked at people with children 6 months to under 4 years. And for this one, 68% used forward-facing child car seat with an inbuilt harness. 35% were using a rear-facing child car seat with an inbuilt harness. 15% were using a rear-facing capsule still, and 6% were using a forward-facing booster seat with a regular seat belt. For children 4 years to 7 years, the most popular were 68% used forward-facing child car seat with an inbuilt harness, and similar 67% were using the booster seat with a regular seat belt, and 5% were using already using a regular vehicle seat and seat belt. Not only 1% for rear-facing capsules. And then finally, we looked at 7 years to 13 years, and the most popular here was a regular vehicle seat and seatbelt, 65%. 29% were using a forward-facing booster seat with a regular seatbelt, and 19% were using a forward-facing seat with an inbuilt harness. And then we were interested in how confident caregivers were that the child restraints were being installed correctly in the vehicle. 47% were very confident, 42% were extremely confident, 9% reasonably, and 2% slightly. None said not at all. For the members who weren't confident that it was installed correctly, the key aspects that they cited were the booster seat not fitting properly, ensuring the belt or harness was at the appropriate height, tight enough, and then ensuring the restraint was attached or fixed to its point. And then finally, we also looked at whether they felt they received adequate guidance when they were using a child restraint for the first time. And this was overwhelmingly, people said yes, 89% thought that they received adequate guidance, and then 11% said no. So we looked at the people who said no, and they expressed, or the majority expressed, that professional guidance and clear instructions would significantly improve the installation experience. So just to summarise, majority of the surveyed members supported or had mixed views for a range of our proposed changes to the legislation. So many of them supported increasing the age requirement for transitioning from rearward facing to forward facing from 6 to 12 months. Many supported increasing the age requirement to be able to sit in the front seat from 7 to 12 years. Many also supported requiring all children under 45 centimetres tall to use a booster seat. And then there was a lot of support for requiring child restraints to be used in taxis and ride shares based on the same requirements as for private vehicles. But there wasn't much support, or people just had mixed views about increasing that age requirement from 6 months to 2 years as opposed to 12 months. So these results, we're hoping to use these to inform our own policy development, but it's, I guess, they're results that can be used to inform policy development in general and possibly legislative change. And also the results show that there's opportunities for education and guidance surrounding the correct child restraint installation, and also the safest time to transition children to the next category of restraint. Are there any questions?
Rachel, I've got a question. Did you ask people what age they swapped their kids from one seat to the next type?
Yes, so we were looking at the what age group, the
Not in age groups, just like You know,
Oh,
was
no.
it 7 months? Was it 12 months?
Oh,
Was it?
we didn't specifically ask that question. So the opinion panel, many other opinion panels go out at the same time as the survey that we were running. So it was like we had to sort of have a reduced question sample, but it would be interesting.
So
if
is
we
that-
tried again.
So does that mean that with the age, some of those ones you were talking about, but the types of child restraints, you couldn't look at people with kids under 1 or under 2, you can only look at under 6 months or 6 months to 4 years? Like you don't know the ages of the kids, just the brackets.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be, because that was quite interesting the way it went. Like so many people were happy to move it up to 12 months, but nobody, or not nobody, but a much smaller were happy to do it up to 2 years as one example. Like that was,
I think
kind of
I think
wild.
it
And the
really
difference between
demonstrates
those
the
groups.
Yeah, definitely demonstrates the people who would be most impacted by these changes, I think. So if their children have already passed that stage, then they're probably fine with climate change. But if it impacts their children specifically, they're probably less likely to want to keep their children in restraints for a bit longer.
If you wait 20 minutes, I'll answer that question.
thanks.
But also that changing from front to rear facing, that eye contact when you're driving and you've got, you know, a child over 12 months. They're really starting to be very responsive. You need to actually
Anecdotally, I've
look at.
heard that that's a reason why a lot of people want to transition their child so they can see them. Yeah.
Or I think what Mel said about that little clip thing, that, you know, trying to get your kid up over the or under, you know, I mean, you should undo it so that you make it, adjust it every time. But I guess a lot of people just leave the strap there and try to, you know, work their child either under or over that strap, which is, if they're asleep, insanely hard, or if they're awake and flapping about, like even harder. So anyway, yeah.
I think also, I mean, again, anecdotally, it's like once they're forward facing, you get more space for the front seats, you know, so it's less compressed. And also a lot of people I know, you know, if they've got older siblings, particularly the younger kid wants to be switched to forward facing. So you've got a 1-year-old saying, I want to turn around. So I think there's lots of those pressures on the parents to think, oh, actually it's easier to switch them. Rather than hold out, and unless you really feel, okay, the law is saying I've got to keep them this way, or the evidence really says that it's the best thing to do, a lot of parents will probably just give in.
And that's where it sort of is not great, that the law is almost like minimum standard as opposed to like much closer to best practice. You know, like we're basically saying, oh, right down here at the absolute minimum, and then people go, yeah, great, oh, finally they're 6 months today, or they're 7 today, you know. Like your kid asking you, am I tall enough today? Like, you know, interesting.
We also did, we showed them a table of the current legislation, but we didn't want to influence too much what they thought about best practice. So we didn't show them what best practice was. So it's possible that could have influenced them as well.
I think you sort of hit a point too with, I'm finding with society now, not just the kids' seats, but in general, is that people tend to do what they have to, not what they should do. In the old days, we used to do things because you should do that, as morally correct or whatever. Now it says, can I get away with not doing it? And they always seem to go for the easier option now. I don't know if that's just
I mean,
general.
You just think about posted speed signs, right? Like that's the maximum you're supposed to do on that road. But what people take it is, that's what I have to do. The law is telling me, like the government, do 70. And then if I have to overtake, obviously I have to do more than that. So that's what I'm going to do, you know. So you end up with it not being, you know, it's like we set these standards and people take them as like targets. They're like, that's the goal. 70, that's the goal. Like, well, yeah, but if it's raining and it's foggy and you can't see anything, like bring your speed down because you can't do 70. You know, as an example of something that's kind of related.
No, you are right. Like I said, they strive to meet the minimum standard, and after that,
but they don't know it's the minimum standard. They think the
Government,
government
perhaps
is
more generously, they assume that the government is making legislation in line with best practice.
Yeah.
If you were to interpret that more generously, they might think, well, the government wouldn't tell me I could put my child in the front seat from 7 years if that wasn't the safest option.
Yeah. That's exactly.
And this is a bit of an internal joke in a way. In vehicle safety standards, this whole seating in the front seat with the child, because some of the statistics are taken where it was against the law to have the child in the front seat, and now it's become the safest seat for a child because no child has been injured in that front seat. So when you take statistics, you've got to look at those sort of things as, there's a reason for it. And it's not just because we said no one's sitting in the front seat, but because no one's doing there. But with my son, when I allow him to go in the front seat, I actually tell him to move the seat all the way back because of the way the airbag deploys, because that's another concern is with kids sitting in the seat and the kid behind wants extra room, so the mum moves the seat forward. But now the kid in the front seat is exposed to the airbag at a lot closer rate. So that's where you start having facial injuries, and you'll know with airbags going on.
I don't know how accurate it is now, but I always recall that the basis of that legislation was the US airbags that went off a lot quicker than the Australian.
So originally what it
standards.
was, because Americans, they didn't have to require to have a seatbelt. So the way that when an airbag goes off, they go off approximately about 0.23 per millisecond. So if you're wearing a seatbelt, your time from when you hit the airbag is increased. So the American airbags go off a lot quicker. So because you have less time because the seatbelt's not slowing you down before you're hitting it. That's why the American airbags used to go off a lot quicker, but I think their legislation may have changed.
No, I don't think so. I think
That's still,
seatbelt laws in the US is state by state.
Yeah.
yes.
So some states have it and some
Yeah.
don't. So I think the vehicle manufacturers do a standard for the lowest, like the non-seatbelt wearing states.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Potentially. Hopefully they don't, because there has been a lot of children dying in the front seats with their bags going off. But yeah, they hurt. That's for sure.
I'm sure just around the ride share and taxis, what is the legislation, or is there any move to change it or to have regulations that you can order?
So currently, there's no requirement to have child restraints in the vehicle. You can bring your own if you want, or there are actually some companies you can call specifically if you want a seat. The best practice definitely does say that, or is in support of having restraints in the vehicles, whether it's parents bringing their own or them having them. Yeah, I guess it's not quite decided yet.
It certainly would be something that, with a growing use of ride share, and I suppose I think of going to the airport, people don't want their own, unless they're taking it with them on the planes, they don't want their restraint with them. But it would probably be, that information is probably useful, being able to be shared, the companies that you can order those. So
Uber now in Victoria and New South Wales have a program where you can choose a car that has car restraints in them. I just did this just recently because we trying to work out how to get to the airport with a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And there's a taxi company that I think they're called like Family Share, Family Ride, something like that. And they literally are, that's their whole business, is that they are like not a ride share, but like a taxi service, but for families. And they come off the same group that did that, what were they called? You know, like if you've gone somewhere with your family, or even if you've gone somewhere by yourself, but you've gone with your car and then you've ended up having a few drinks at the barbecue, and you call them up, designated drivers or something.
Oh, yeah,
and they turn up, 2 of them turn up, and then one of them drives your car and you and all your family and your kids and whoever else is in it. And so there's the same company, it's the second arm of the same company. So they'll also use their own vehicles with their own car seats and pick you up. Yeah. It's quite a lot more expensive. It starts to be kind of the same sort of price as getting like a charter vehicle to the airport, you know, in the sort of $100 to $200 kind of mark, rather than, you know, some of the DDs and that can be $20, depending on obviously where you live and stuff like that.
Who takes the ownership if an accident happens and stuff? Was that covered in it at all? Like, did it say that the parents had to go through and check the seat, or was it drive?
Not that I saw in the reading,
That'd be the hard bit, wouldn't it? If you're in
Yeah.
rideshare, I mean, I wouldn't want anyone to put their kid in the car seat I put it in, even though I put in heaps for my own kids. I wouldn't want to do it. I did it for my brother, and I said, you go and check it though, because I don't want to be responsible. Yeah, so it just opened up a lot of.
So it looks like maybe even WA, it would be useful to have a service like that.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I think if it goes well, the trial in the east, it would be good if Uber brought that in. I got really excited when I was like, great, Uber's got it. And then I was like, oh, not here.
When I was in California, we had to have a child seat for a bus.
Yeah, okay.
So when we went to Disneyland, and yeah, they actually said, have you got a child? And we had to order it and pay for it as a part of that. But if you're to include it in a ride share, the issue is that because we're talking, you've got forward and rearwards facing and boosters. So that means you've got 3 seats.
Yeah.
You have to carry it all times. In the luggage space, in modern cars, you wouldn't be able to carry it. And then you're picking up a person who's got 3 bags from Bali.
Yeah, it'd probably be one of those, like the apps have got, do you want the large one? Do you want the luxury one?
Yeah,
You choose the one that is the family one. So you would.
And my understanding, so New South Wales, I believe, has laws that require taxis to have to provide child restraints, but all the wheelchair accessible taxis will carry the child restraints. So if you book a wheelchair accessible taxi, you can then get the child restraint for your child. But obviously, if you hail one in the street, it's not necessarily going to have a restraint.
I certainly having an option when you do call up your cab or an Uber that you can actually sign up to have somewhere where you can say, yes, I've got a child of this age or a person with this disability would be beneficial, but to actually implement it and make everyone do it, it just wouldn't be practical for every ride share.
So we might move this conversation to the morning tea, but did Miriam, did you have something to say?
Oh, not really. I was contemplating weighing in about the legislation around rideshare, and just saying that when the rideshare rules came in, transport were very against the idea of requiring child car restraints in rideshare. They felt that it should be the same as taxis, which had an existing exemption. And much as the Road Safety Commission tried to argue the opposite and say, well, because they're on demand and you have to book them, then you should have to have a seat. That was not a battle that we won, even though it's our legislation, but it is something that we are looking at, and we are really happy to see this results from your research, Rachel, that kind of backs us up in terms of hopefully one day changing it so that you are required to have a car seat in a booked rideshare service.
Well, thank you. Sounds great. So we might just move to the morning tea break. We're running a little bit late, so we might just condense the morning tea a little bit to maybe 15 minutes, but you can bring your stuff in here if you want. So it's just at the end of the hall.
You want us to make it shorter than that, like 10 minutes? Or?
Yeah, we can do 10 minutes.
Fine.
In the interest of time. But yeah, you
can bring stuff back.
Feel free to bring everything back into the room. And we might condense the brainstorming just a little bit as well.
Can we leave our stuff in here? We'll be all right.
Yeah.
Great.
I will. I was just making sure I could answer your question. There was a sharp increase from 6 months and by 12 months, 1 in 5 forward facing, and by the time 18 months, it was 1.5.
Interesting. Oh, it doesn't surprise me. 6 months seems so tiny, though. So tiny.
I'm actually really glad I got to see the end of what most of Rachel's, because I wasn't wrong. I have got obviously a poll as well, and it's interesting to hear what like the RAC poll is versus because they are and there's many answers. What
Absolutely.
No, Ash installed a walk-in.
I've got 2 mirrors on either side of the bathroom.
Two
Yeah.
ethically high.
Oh,
And realistically, it took all 3 of us just to keep on top of them.
At least it wasn't just you then.
Yes.
Having fun.
It's good to hear that RAC is going to do a few things with the college for the conference.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Been happening in Perth, so yeah, I definitely keep on.
Tammie, you went to the show, eh? You
Mm.
met her quite
It
easily.
was really useful. What was interesting, you know, the vest that Patty was talking about. So I was chatting to someone at one of the places and they said, oh, we don't have to get exemptions for any of these because they don't actually do anything. And I went,
How you could
oh,
supplement.
it's like, no exemptions needed. And I'm like, so when you brought that picture up, I thought, oh, that's,
Some
quite
of the people
interesting.
you've got to be careful at those shows because they're always face.
I actually knew this person.
Oh,
Yeah. That's why I stood chatting to her and I'm like,
A
oh.
long time as well, so.
We used to have
And I was able to nicely go,
triple
yeah, sure.
Check on.
Yeah.
different
But it was,
every year, conference needed day.
well, absolutely. So anything so their primary thing they did was install the fixings for
Oh, yeah.
people using wheelchairs. But they also had all the other modifications and they said, yeah, unless it actually modifies, we don't need to do anything regarding exemptions.
So we might get
Yeah.
started now.
Problem is there's so many different government agencies that have a looking for it.
Yeah.
They don't communicate it.
So next our speaker is we have Felicity Heath from the Children's Hospital. So she's an ED nurse. She's been a nurse with 20 years emergency experience, 15 as a paediatric emergency nurse. She's worked in trauma settings internationally in Afghanistan, Iraq and South Sudan. She's worked as a trauma nursing educator and now works as a clinical nurse specialist at Perth Children's Hospital. She's also a mother to 2 boys who she plans to keep rear-facing probably until they get their learner's permit. So thanks for listening.
Both of whom you'll get to see feature in here. I was looking for stock images of children in car seats and then I thought, hold on a moment, I have some of those myself. Just before we go on, I know that today is the last day of National Reconciliation Week. And I'm sure the country has been acknowledged already at the beginning, but I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the first healthcare practitioners on this land. They took the mayat, the red sap, the marri trees along Kings Park and used it as an antiseptic, and then they dried it and powdered it and put it into wounds to to reduce bleeding. So in fact, we have had trauma nurses on country here for 65,000 years, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that and where we stand in that. So children and road safety. I have certainly some interesting workplaces in my background. I first became interested in children about 15 years ago when I moved to paediatrics, but thinking about children and road safety, I think for me, when I was headed to Iraq, I spent quite a sobering hour being briefed about the potential risks of being kidnapped, the need for proof of life questions, and the kidnap ransom insurance that was being purchased on my behalf, all of which was quite overwhelming. I then had to do some chemical weapons exposure training in terms of being able to respond to that. And then we sat down and someone said, what's the biggest risk to you when you're in the field? And we were all like, oh, is it kidnapping? Is it the chemical weapons? No, it's a motor vehicle accident. It's the trip to and from the airport. It's the late night road trip out to see a patient, etc. Regardless of where I am or what I am doing, still the biggest risk to me is road safety. And then when we look at children, so as adults, as a general population, motor vehicle accidents and road safety issues pose the biggest threat. And then children are this really unique population within that who are already predisposed in various ways that we'll talk about today to have an additional impact from that trauma, whether it be the way they're built. So children have a greater body surface area ratio, and that means that if they have a burn from a car accident or a skin interruption or a degloving, they're actually more susceptible to heat loss, to dehydration. They also are less able to tolerate periods of hypoxia or no oxygen. So if in a motor vehicle accident something happens to impede their breathing, they're less able to cope with that for as long as we are as adults. So they've got all these factors that increase the way trauma impacts on them. And then they have all these really unique developmental aspects that change the way they increase their risk or perceive risk around motor vehicle accidents. So children, not great at walking, however, very poor at assessing that risk. So Albie, who you can see there, absolutely no idea that he's quite terrible at walking. So he will step out onto things, he will look at things. Similarly, Theo, who we'll see shortly, is a bit bigger, feels confident knowing he can't step out in front of cars. However, if there is a street we are crossing and cars are parked on it, his eye line is exactly at the bonnet level of the cars that are parked, which obscure his ability to see into the street and determine if anything's coming. Similarly, he has quite an egocentric brain development, so he thinks, well, I saw the car, so the car must be able to see me. He's also incredibly bad at judging how fast he can run. Fritha will attest the number of times he's like, did you see how fast I was running? And it was not much more than a stroll. So children bring all these complexities of development, all of which in contexts of unsafety and road issues can really magnify those issues. So what increases the risk for injury severity? There are three things we know increase the risk for severity. First is being unrestrained. The second is being incorrectly or inappropriately restrained, which will be the bulk of what I'm talking about today. And then not sitting in the back. And some ideas around that relate to the crumple zone, the most likely mechanism of impact, and where they are in relation to a forward or rear crash. Like at the front, we have the bonnet and the front seats. At the back, we have the boot. And all of that provide a little bit of absorption and crumple zone available to protect the back seat. I'd like to specify that my child was fully supervised here. Admittedly only by his grandparents, which I think is probably the biggest risk of all. So if I was very interested, Rachel, to hear about your child car seat survey, because I have actually, Perth Children's Hospital is part of the Paediatric Improvement Collaborative, which looks at Royal Children's, Perth Children's Hospital, the Queensland Children's Hospital, Adelaide Women's and Children's, all making sure that our guidelines are all aligned. So we're all saying the same thing, and that allows the best practice to sort of be supported from there. So as part of that, Royal Children actually do a number of really interesting polls. They did one in 2019 on car seats, and now this one in 2024. So they asked 1,399 parents about their 2,146 children aged 0 to 12 years. They asked which type of car seat the child travelled in most often. They asked at what age their youngest child was first turned forward facing and the three main reasons for that, and at what age their child was first moved from a restraint or a booster to an adult seatbelt alone. The results of that were pretty interesting. We can see that despite complying with so parents overwhelmingly were great at following the law. However, many children were not travelling in car seats recommended to keep them as safe as possible. And there's that quite significant mismatch between what is the government requirement and what is best practice. It is safest practice for a child to travel in a rearward facing restraint from birth as long as they still fit. But over half of children, so about 55% in the poll, had their first ride forward facing before 18 months. And 1 in 3 children move out of a booster seat for reasons that don't actually align with best practice, most travelling with an adult seatbelt alone before they're 10 years old. And so that's things like the child didn't want to. Yeah, they didn't like the booster seat. Their friends didn't think it was cool, rather than that they had actually met, say, all requirements of the 5-step test. And so whilst this is only a small sample size, it's certainly a reflection of what we see in the emergency department and in Perth and across the country, that children aren't spending as long either rear facing or in restraints as a whole as our best practice would suggest. So we will look a little bit at our various restraints and the values of them and how that impacts on children specifically. So this is Theo, who's really demonstrating the big head. Yeah, children have very big heads relative to the rest of their body. If you are born at term, your body to head ratio is about 1 to 3. You're 25% head, which is a lot of head, especially when you think about a little baby. Theo demonstrating that you've got no neck, yeah, which makes it really hard to hold your big head nice and still. So by the time I'm an adult, my head is roughly 8 to 6%, 6 to 8% of my body. So if we think about a head that must be supported during speed, if I have the rest of my body, and this is about 6% versus Theo, whose head's about 25%, that's 4 times more head as a proportion of his body that he has to control during movement in an accident. So if we think about children who are rear-facing, I brought my monster truck. I actually had to sneak them into the bag before I left, so Theo didn't see them. But in an example where a child is forward-facing, in instances of a collision, you can see that the child comes forward, not always out. That's when they're unrestrained. Will come forward, and suddenly you've got this really big head, admittedly on straps here for your shoulders, but if your head flings forward like that, and your head is so large on your weak muscles, in the right impact, that can create about 300 kilos worth of impact on a child, which is a phenomenal amount of impact. Yeah, we'll talk about that bit now. So 300 kilos of force onto the head can actually, in the right impact, result in a complete dislocation of the head from the neck, something called an atlanto-occipital dislocation or an internal decapitation. So it is actually enough force for the head and spine to detach from one another. In children, we see this really interesting physiology where their bones and their ligaments are still weak, and the bones aren't fully what we refer to as ossified, which means bony. They're not fully bony yet. They're quite cartilaginous and mobile. So the spinal column, which is the use your words, Felicity, bones and ligaments and structures that support the spinal cord inside have a range of motion in children up to 5 centimetres. They're super bendy, super flexible. The spinal cord inside it has a range of movement of 0.5 centimetre. So in fact, your child's spine, in terms of bones and ligaments, can move much further without breaking than the spinal cord can. And so we see something in children known as spinal cord injury without radiological abnormality. So in fact, you can sever your spinal cord without breaking any of your spinal bones. And that's when we think about those huge movements in terms of which way you are swinging forward. In a forward-facing scenario versus a rear-facing. Now, if you're rear-facing in the back of the car, the reason rear-facing is safest regardless of the direction that the car is travelling, regardless of the point of impact, whether it's a front impact, whether it's a rear impact or a side impact, the reason that rear-facing remains safest is because that's direction largely that cars travel in. There are very, very few accidents in which the car is reversing that contains a large amount of speed. Not many cars, certainly not mine, can do much greater than 20 k's an hour, I reckon, reversing. So when children are moving in the direction that the car is and the car seat is behind them, when the car stops at the point of impact, the children have this really big, lovely car seat behind them that supports their head, neck and torso all in a straight line, helps absorb the impact of the stop, but also maintains this alignment. And so the head, neck and torso all get pushed into the back of the car seat in a straight line. So there's no huge movement of those spinal cords, which can result in such significant damage. Versus that sort of fling forward with that big head movement that we see in a forward-facing child. And so for us as adults, an impact that might result in a whiplash for a forward-facing child that has that big impact, it can be an absolutely life-threatening or life-altering scenario. So interestingly, the paediatric improvement collaboration suggests that when your child outgrows their rear-facing restraint, that you look for a larger rear-facing restraint rather than turn your child forward-facing. And it's very much the opinion that size-based, not age-based progression is in line with best practice, and certainly shoulder length. So the shoulder markers on the restraints should be used as a guide rather than overall length. Theo will be 4 in November. He rear faces all the time, just fold his little legs in because he's quite a long-legged boy. He's actually got plenty of growth to go within that car seat because his torso is not past the point of safety. And the joy of these flexible ligaments, not fully ossified bones, he'll sit cross-legged for multiple hours, where if I sat like that, I would need a hip replacement 20 minutes later. Because I think that's often people think, oh, well, where will their legs go? They're too big, etc. I've told him that's why we have a boot. Your legs can just go over. I don't think this is really happy about its battery. I'll go so fast. Then when we look at forward-facing versus a booster seat, it's important to mention that it's not as though the forward-facing restraint is nothing. Like rear-facing, when we look at the mechanisms of impact, adds a huge amount of value. But having a restraint that you are fully secured into has additional benefit over the lap sash attached to a booster. As you can see in the picture, it does provide some significant lateral impact protection and also helps to maintain that lateral position. Because if you think about a side impact, even if we are forward and we have a side impact, our bodies, which is actually why a T-bone or a side impact collision for adults is the most associated with negative outcomes, because your body pivots, and that change of alignment in your body is where you can have a significant impact in terms of disruption of spinal cords, bones, things like that. Whereas if you are in this, broken the matrix, if you are inside a 5-point restraint with side edges, your whole body again pivots to that point of impact, but in an alignment. Plus the lateral protection on the sides will absorb a lot of that shock. And as Theo will tell you, all the astronauts in F1 races wear a 5-point harness because it's the safest. Honestly, it would be the safest for adults. You know, there is no question that having those additional points of contact with the seat creates significant benefit, because seatbelt and car seat restraint belts are enormously rated. Like the point of strength on them is fabulous. It's the point where it attaches to the car seat that is the point of weakness. So the more of those we have to distribute the energy over, the better it is. And again, like secured across big bones, so like shoulders, rib cage, and then these femurs, which are some of the strongest bones in the body, absorbing that impact rather than the soft tissues beneath it is really beneficial. A cord, that's probably a good idea. And then we look at the booster seat versus adult seatbelt alone. So children who wear only a lap belt compared with children who are in a booster seat, a rear or forward facing restraint are 3.5 times more likely to be seriously injured. And we will talk about the way that, we'll go forward to the 5-step test, which Rachel beautifully described. Can they sit with their backs firmly against the seat back, bend their knees comfortably over the front, sit with the sash belt across their mid-shoulder, and sit with the lap belt across the top of their thighs? And are they able to stay in this position for the whole car trip? So let's go back and we'll have a look. So ideally, a child will sit in the in a large chair just with a sash belt when their back is against and their knees over the edge, because you kind of have to sit on a chair with bent knees. So if I'm not quite big enough, what I'm going to do is slump down until my knees can go around there. And so then I've got all this weight this way, so it continues to drag me forward. And there's now a big gap between me and that big strong seat that I was using to absorb impact and keep me supported in a collision. And so the belt that was previously nicely across my femurs and my thighs, which was going to absorb all that pressure in my huge long bones, is suddenly across my abdomen. So in the point of impact, suddenly I am being accelerated against a stationary belt in my abdomen, which is full of soft organs, particularly prone to like an internal trauma, bleeding, things like that. Believe it or not, there's some quite useful items in here. I don't really want a big. The other thing that happens is that this sash belt that was coming across the middle of my shoulder and up is now sitting much higher up against my neck and head. And so instead of coming across my sternum, my rib cage and my clavicle as a big bony point at which I could absorb a lot of pressure and protect the soft tissue underneath, now suddenly it's sitting on my neck. And so again, we're talking about how strong, like those seatbelts are bulletproof essentially, and now it's sitting against something that I used to breathe. I use blood up and down, in and out of my head and my spinal cord here, and I've got this heavy, designed for impact, to survive impact, sash of a seatbelt sitting up against my neck. And it's capable of creating truly catastrophic injuries from that seatbelt sitting there on those major vessels, on that airway, which if I'm sitting up and it comes across here is actually doing me benefit. So it's, you know, we see that the 5 steps are there, but it's kind of interesting to think about the ways that not following the 5 steps can have a pretty significant impact on children, rather than just, oh, it wasn't convenient, didn't fit, etc. Like, oh, actually slouching a bit in the seat can have a really significant impact should you have a collision. No, that's okay. That's right. I think my last slide just says what I wish all parents knew. And it's fair to say I don't parent tweens and teens. I currently parent in a stage of my life where even on their grumpiest days, my children think I'm the coolest person on the planet. That may change, but I like to think that when they're tweens and teens full of angst and moodiness, I will still be able to say to them, I love you so much, and part of loving you this much is keeping you safe. So please hop into your rear-facing 5 so I can drive you to your high school graduation. Thank you.
Is there any questions?
No, there isn't, but it is very refreshing to get someone from a medical side, because we normally don't have that point of view. And it's, you know, we get a lot of hearsay and people's opinions, but it's nice to hear it from a medical point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would just concur with that and say, I mean, some of that information and the way you share it, if that information could get through to parents I'm sure you try and do that, but for the average person getting a car seat installed, you don't necessarily
And I think
hear about how what you do relates to potential injuries.
And that's what I think, like the parents are so good at following the law. Like at least the data shows at least 90% of the time children are correctly restrained as per the law. And I don't think parents understand that making a decision like that is the difference between whiplash or your child, you know, having a catastrophic spinal injury, because they don't understand that. And as I say, I think they think, oh, well, the law says it's safe, so it's safe. But most of the legislation around those restraints is from 2009, that legislation, and hasn't been reviewed since, which I'm guessing, based on my understanding of health data, means that the data they used for that is at least probably 2005. Like, we're looking at a 20-year-old data set that informs our legal requirements now, and now we have much more current understanding of what causes best practice and safety for children, and that's not reflected in the legislation. And I think if parents knew how big the difference was, if you look at the numbers, it's somewhere between 3 and 5 years of additional restraint following best practice than it is the law. That's a pretty significant increase in restraining your child and therefore safe outcomes. Personally, I think we should just make best practice law.
I know, so this is half a question and half just me talking. But I think one issue we're coming across with the rearward facing is when people hit the 4 years and the legislation doesn't stipulate that they can be rearward facing at 4 years. So we're coming sort of a little bit unstuck, and that's something with the revision would be good to see, that kids that are 4 years of age can stay rearward facing.
You know that I've been a very vocal person with this age thing, and I personally believe that age should have nothing to do with it. Sorry, from a medical point, for the first year or two of development, yes, age has got, you know, as your bones harden and so forth. But after a certain period, age really doesn't have anything to do with physics, the size and weight.
I mean, all of the Paediatric Information Collaborative says size-based. They are not interested in age either.
But it shouldn't be child restraints, it should be a person restraint.
I mean, I
So,
have
because the people with different statuses.
who should probably be
Yeah.
able to see
Yeah, exactly.
conversation.
Exactly. I have to approve people who are short stature with different driving aids, and they actually have booster seats in them. And some of them, I'm like, really, you drive like that? Because it's such a small market, no one's really addressed it. And they haven't got a booster seat out. It's got their mum or dad making a foam padding thing that they sit on top of their seat with. It's a little bit. I think in this day and age that we're up to, we can accommodate for everyone's needs, not just the masses. Yes,
The crash dummy thing.
yeah, it's 50.
Felicity, and also thank you for coming on over with tight schedules. So
No problem.
much appreciated. So just to wrap up, so many of you may know that the National Transport Commission is currently in the process of reviewing the child restraint Australian road rules. So for passengers under 16 years old. So this also includes children with medical conditions and disabilities to ensure they're up to date with best practice guidelines. The rules were last reviewed in 2010, and since that time, as we know, there's been some significant changes in the evidence base and best practice. They're going to be working with the state and territory jurisdictions as part of their review, and will be contacting relevant stakeholders to get information. And the information they're wanting to focus on is on things like the appropriate use of child restraints, children using adult seat belts, children travelling in the front seat, and improving the level of protection for children with medical conditions and disabilities. So what I wanted to do now, just quickly, as long as you have time, feel free to leave if not. So basically, we're wanting to get your views on what you think the biggest issues are with child restraints, what you think we should address in an ACAS submission to the NTC review. And if you've identified an issue, what you think a good solution to that issue might be. So I've got some sticky notes here that we can all use to write down. If you want to go and make it groups of like two or three.
We have a clear spot for them. Plenty of room for other people. You can bring your toys over here if you want.
If anyone online has any ideas, then pop it in the chat and we'll record it as well. Because we definitely want to hear from Miriam and Melanie and Nikki if you've got any ideas.
Do you want me to write?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey.
Scared to ask Nigel. I'll ask Patty. For no reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine are 30s. That's a lot of memory going back.
I mean, I think that's a pretty big thing. It's
I didn't want to finish.
moving away from age, things like a
Yeah.
fence.
Yeah.
Talking about kind of
I
showing.
think there's sort of two parts of this. There's
Who's
the
that flexibility?
legislation side, and then there's the actual
Everyone
are people fitting it correctly side, which is
But it doesn't need to be
obviously it's just that lots of people are complying with the existing law, but the laws
This,
are pretty weak.
this don't you see things for
Yeah,
this
great.
change,
So-
isn't it?
One of the things.
Yeah, I imagine that focus, yeah, after, yeah.
I would
Yeah, I just
actually
had a look at the
go back to the basics a little
going
bit.
around.
We keep making advancements in processes to a
Was it
point
the
where I
Pima
think
they were gonna
people forget the reporting originally came from. And that was
The
in
NTC
interview,
and its mission,
sorry,
that's to
speaking.
look at changing legislation
It
across.
was to do with how the
Yes.
city, not city,
Yes.
The Australian,
a lot of
You
that
have to
wants to make it to
keep it to apply them. Anyway.
I'm not assuming anyone knows the Australian road.
No, we're doing,
That rest up and your
Kind of
legs
base
down
things
and
off
down.
the end today.
Yes, exactly.
Seat.
or other. So
And also
that way
the
we're
other
not
aids that are, not aids.
pretty obvious.
Now,
On the other one,
have around them now, so they've got entertainment systems around them now and
cut off
the
what do you
sippy
call
bottles
them,
that are made quite
thresholds for
substantial.
Steel.
like
Steel and tablets and all of these, I think we're forgetting those components or.
That's probably, I think, not interested in
Use items like, you know,
Yes,
that.
you remove
environment.
age requirements, you can't even just use,
Yes.
But even just having it like with
do we,
the
like,
tablets.
will the average person out there
Yeah.
comply with that
Funny,
effectively?
and that's
Because,
jam.
I think the main argument probably in favour of age is that it's such a simple metric that everyone understands, and there's no effort in doing it. So I'm not saying we don't do that, I guess there's a slight risk is
I
that
would
you might
actually-
get some people who
Not in
don't
legislation.
bother.
that's where you could talk about
typical age.
this
See to do
like
is to have it as a.
brackets, you know, it's going to
With
be,
education,
you know, 2 to 3
Yeah,
years, or whatever.
even
the-
some sort of guidance,
Yeah.
so roughly when.
You'd have to
Yeah.
give a range.
The origins of, so
to,
people,
you know, so it wasn't,
see,
but yes, a change or
it's the
increase.
simple things that we rush over, we don't think about it.
Right.
But it seems to me like, yeah, the manufacturers are pretty good in terms of they'll reckon, well, certainly like
What
the
other
one
things are around?
we had, you know,
Seats, you know,
says
sitting
keep them
upright, all
here
those.
for a long time, and he recommends do it as long as possible and
So
design
you're
for
more
you up
thinking
to whatever
more
age, 3 years old.
from an education point of view.
Yeah,
So then
definitely.
maybe the biggest one
Okay.
is align.
Because, yeah, we go too advanced sometimes, we need to go
Best
to the start.
practice.
Yeah. Sit upright in your car. Put
So-
loose items away.
Research.
best practice.
So I think
research
from a installation type of thing, they're doing some good things with having, say, the QR codes on the side of the seat, so you can
Like
access
that
the
one.
videos straight away. That
This
does
like-
address what you're
This
saying
things are-
with the people that aren't in seats anymore,
Right.
that have all the gadgets or.
Let's stick you on the back end front.
But you even get the kids that you have just booster seats, my son used to cross his legs on it.
Yeah.
You know, keep your legs straight, and then once they get out of the booster seat, because there's still only set,
I think
as you know, boys are still stupid.
the old legislation wouldn't have anything around high chairs and
And-
exits.
Seven's still very young.
I think that needs to at least be addressed, so
Slouch back and.
options are
But
available.
it's, yeah, it's very strange that, you know,
Might be twisted like she was
you
meant.
have a new baby on your lap in taxi.
So is that a Sadira,
Sit-
you know
sit-
how Sadira goes into schools?
Yes.
And does stuff with parents in the younger
Yes.
age groups, is that something as part of their program? Because they are probably the best kit who are already engaging in all those groups.
Yeah, I think that would be the way to get, yeah, make it a game for the kids, you know, to say, this is how I sit.
Yeah.
You're not sitting right, mum, you slouch, get your feet off the dashboard and all these sort of things, because a lot of things is.
You can say, like, in a sense, it undermines
Active seat belts we've mentioned.
all of everybody else when you
Side
say
airbags,
actually,
you've got
if it's
front
optional,
airbags, we've
but
got-
what are you saying that actually it's not that important?
now as well. So there are a whole lot of
Yeah.
different things in place.
Probably registered.
You can't,
You know.
rest with your head out the
And
window.
there's a whole lot in the population that don't have access to vehicles. so they're
I'm
reliant on
probably
that, so it
thinking
could
more
be
from the legislation side of
every
things,
time
and,
the
you know,
child-
I think what Felicity said, just
think that
reinforced
they're
it,
pretty
need
much-
by enforcing people to have their kids forward facing longer. So I
So in
think
terms of sitting in the
going with
front
what
seat,
your
that also,
research said,
that
up
also
to
be a
12
height
months at
base.
least. So the Australian standards, their new seats they've just brought out, they've got rid of the version that took kids up to 6 months. So all the new ones coming out designed for at least
the moment, 7
months of age. So we've got the seats that
there's a
support
cut
it.
off for going to a lap dash, but also being able to go in the front seat. So it
Sorry,
sounds like maybe there should be a separation of those two
Yeah, we were
elements, right?
trying to line ourselves up.
Like, is there?
Oh, the EU standards?
Would it be the same, like?
No,
it's just mumbled.
You're muffled. I have no idea what you're
Sorry.
saying. They are weight-based still. And theirs are a little
Right,
bit
okay,
special.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a big
And the
fan of
thing is, like-
reinventing wheel, and we tend to do that.
No.
So if there is someone, another,
Quite.
especially with the EU,
There's no
because our
reason
cars
to
are
versus for you, the 5-step test and IUB, is much more, I think, open.
the manufacturers in
Interpretation
Asia,
and it's much more sort of
yeah,
safety driven.
Australia.
How do you assess this?
Yes.
How do police, because it comes down to whatever these laws are all based on
Legislation must be.
So-
police enforcement,
Design
and if
is
it's not
basically
enforced.
mirror the.
So I can
European
appreciate an
rules,
age, but why
some
7 was pretty arbitrary,
like your
maybe
sort
that
of
was when they went to school.
place.
One state
and
at
we
one
need to sort of
I don't know. Would-
potentially focus towards transitioning that way as well, if the car manufacturers and the
The
ADRs are.
interesting thing is apparently Europeans are actually looking at putting in. We've heard on the,
Both
very,
ways.
on the grapevine,
Or
I
make
don't know
it
where they got the report.
You would think a legislation now comes with
So it's right, this is hard.
education, but maybe
I know so say that if you did go to the 12
Results
months,
that Rachel.
all this, like,
Was how.
our Australian standard would be up absolutely. Go with that. So, the vast majority of seats on the market at the moment,
But interestingly, how much were mixed or.
the high markers
If
would
you had education.
not
along
has to
with
be
it,
at least 12 months. It probably removes that grey area for parents going,
uncertainty
oh,
into
they're 6
support.
months regardless of the being
just
12 months.
I did find
So
out
at the moment, the seat kind of forces
randomised
anyway,
control trial.
and we wouldn't really be disadvantaging
New South
any
Wales.
groups. So I know they often look at that, as you said, overnight.
Sheet, which hopefully it doesn't specify what was on that, but
you would have some lower socioeconomic groups that would really struggle to comply with.
the.
Whereas the vast majority of seats on the market at the moment would be able to make that
So I'll
requirement.
pass
So
that
you
on.
couldn't say to them, okay, you must stay in a
It's the
room
same hospital
until
around.
you get this size.
You mentioned
Because-
New South Wales.
Yeah.
What's on it, on it. So if you have a height for Beaver's face,
Melanie.
it's between nothing and this height.
Yeah.
But then you have forward
Probably
facing,
part
it
of
starts
the
here and
plan.
goes up to here.
Yeah.
So there is this transition period.
Yeah,
here
where they can choose.
where they can choose.
Yeah.
So if you stipulated that you can go all the way up to here with this minimum.
But yeah, just on the edge,
Yeah.
I was interested, also, there is obviously,
And don't worry about the age.
people.
Yeah,
feel
so
like they
I
know
mean,
what
at the moment, the
to do.
regs are
Like there's
written
kind of
that
the
it
confidence,
needs,
they've
you
never
need to
they
follow
can check to the
manufacturer's
high levels
instructions.
of.
So they have to
use found
meet
with them, so
their
there's a mismatch
limits.
between, but like people feel like they,
Yeah,
they're
there
doing
is
it okay
the thing of do you
themselves,
remove
but-
age
I think this is,
and just go with the seats. You would then need to
various
make
other
sure
groups before,
that all the seats are based on the same seated height.
because every
Yeah,
parent.
so is there a?
Because there is-
Standard?
Because that's.
At the moment,
and-
there is a
so that-
variation.
You get these like.
So-
Right, because like it doesn't matter
Sorry,
what issue.
jabber
it's like case studying,
There is a variation,
child
so
care, child
you
restraint.
do get a
child
difference between seats.
economic,
Not specifically, especially.
breastfeeding versus
Um,
it's a whole
huge
thing, right? There's
So is there a strange standard set for child?
and some of them are.
Yeah.
And it's stipulated in there,
Space,
the heights?
Yeah, it's got all the,
massive consequences.
Yeah, so we're not gonna reinvent it,
But
just
I
say
think
follow
it's
those.
right.
ones.
Well, I think.
Well,
yeah, but those lights are
Stuff like that, but
variable.
parents.
Okay.
So they have a
Make a
tolerance.
Yeah,
decision
but they
about
would
the
have a
thing they're
minimum.
gonna.
Yes, they do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And then force they're gonna make them like death, but that's the right thing, because
Yes.
Or similar one, but
that's what they're doing for their child, and they want to believe they're doing the right thing for their child all the time. So, that doesn't surprise me that parents are like,
Someone who's got.
yeah, of course, I'm extremely confident my child is fine.
10 years
They
old.
have to be, they have to feel
Because
that
they've got to
way.
drive their car every day with
They have
it.
to
Yeah,
drive
yeah.
their kid in their car.
But
all the
also
time,
in
you know,
terms of
it's-
education,
Because
it's
they may have designed.
maybe it's the
It's a sort of this way,
female
it can be this
caregiver
way.
that's the one that
Or
gets that
it's
original
just 10
information,
years
maybe the
this way.
male
Our
does,
seat,
but
our airbag's going to be going.
have consistency,
Yeah.
the grandparents
Where the
Are you
manufacturer never
just
tested.
telling them,
Yeah.
this is
And-
how
and
you do
that's
it.
my
Is there
concern
some
now.
solid,
Like,
clear information which you share the days that
I
they're
use that
using,
in the
they've got the
manufacturing
child
test a
who's
certain
a
way to start putting
partner
kids.
gets
forward.
that information.
Parents going to listen
Maybe
anyway.
they may not.
No, but if
use
it's
it,
written,
even
if
though
it's
the
some
point
sort of
is
education,
Yeah.
it's like a
Yeah.
system,
catch-22
it
is like,
at least allows
it's like
um,
phase of higher now.
transfer of
Weight, the center of gravity can be
They're
higher.
literally
Yeah.
Some
roof
sort of like
of a lot of vehicles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
it's
center
not
of gravity used to see something like that. It's like heavy. So you raise them, the center of gravity is here now. How's that going to be?
video
Yeah. So, and I guess it would.
we put it on it, useless really, but
Mind
it's probably
it's very
people
fun.
really need
To manufacture
No.
with
the
ADRs,
definition's
they
fantastic,
automatically.
seriously, it's so good.
Or
But like
they meet
that kind of
standard
information,
vehicle
no,
of,
that kind of
who's to say
information
that meets
in
that
a
standard.
video alongside the.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
The
Yeah.
rules.
But
or
that's-
here's what
Yeah,
you
how do you know in a video?
And here's, that's not. And here's the, you know,
Quickly,
here's the
that's,
practitioners.
legislation doesn't match it,
reason.
and also.
Why you've got to have your
Mentioned it
that.
before.
This is why your knees got to be over here. This is why,
Now, we weren't.
Yeah, you need that to bring it home as to what actually matters.
you know, as opposed to, oh, look,
Seatbelts, our section was it?
these are fine and the
Which
this
has
is fine,
the
but they're not
power
quite
over.
here. So, you know, 4 out of 5 is pretty good kind of.
So that's what
you know,
we'll,
but if you
that's
have
no
that
problem.
alongside and said, well, actually, we don't need
Manufacturers
this one, then what
have
happens?
their sort of, you know,
You get that
in a new airbag system or whatever device
Yeah,
they want to.
that actually makes it all worse, all
That's
the
not
way
right
down
with
the
the Australian
path.
standards because they could.
Because yeah, like if you do have a child, for example, you're snacking you the whole time.
One area
Change.
safe,
Like as a parent,
but
you know, you pick your battles as the parent, right? Like so, there's some things where you give in, or after a while, you're like actually, how important is that? So you sort of need that information to
Because if you're
empower you. Then
you parent,
By the time you're
you don't have to
seven
mention
versus
that's
12-year-old.
you do it stuff, you know, to think, oh yeah, I need to do this as a
Inappropriate way, like not many
Well,
people
I know we had
with their
um,
children,
an
especially
example
now, like to be able to
recently
say,
where
the reason I'm
Miriam
not letting you change
contacted
is
myself,
X, Y, and Z.
contacted you,
You know.
Yeah.
and it was about
Both the
one
child
the
and
child
parent will
is
report
older
back
than
that
7,
interaction.
and they use a
Yes,
phone
those
book
percent.
essentially.
Oh, is that the one I?
Yeah.
I said, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I took that one, I spoke to
And that's where
You
you
know,
got people
Walking up to
that
that line
are probably more
of like education
experienced in
without.
reading legislation than your average
Kind of make
parent,
sense,
and if
yeah,
they're
quite well
still
done.
going.
You tell us
Happily
that's
to
around from
this.
Any.
I know, you did.
It's like going down the road
You
mention
don't need to.
You
You can
have
have
to
a
make
Lego,
that.
whatever they are, quite easily.
when,
Yeah.
Remember the ones
We're
we
not
were
sure.
doing?
yeah, and you can, and also
put an egg
you
in
have
it.
to go, okay, I understand this bit, so by the way,
But
in 50 pages time, there's this little word
Yeah.
that if I don't read that with that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Except, and it's like, oh,
there you go, little asterisks.
I guess it's a bit like,
Funny about change, just to
Seats.
see
Mm.
results.
really basic.
Every time
heard from
my
someone
parents
that
tell me
really
about
knows
what
those
fast
things,
racing was like
because they
when
were-
I was a kid, which I don't feel like was that long ago.
Who could then go,
Like,
okay. my
you just
basic
have a
thing is
bassinet
imagine
shoved
sitting on
in
the
the-
back, that's it.
Yeah.
the car, like in the back seat of the car,
Yeah.
which had the
Very
basics,
fast,
just like
that's
rolling it out
like-
into the bassinet. Like that was having car seats
Yeah.
like that. My mum tells me she had to fight.
Which it
for
kind of
cars
does,
to
isn't it?
buy, so she put me.
Yeah.
But they were,
Things like
you
that.
know, and that was only.
And there's a lot of, and I think,
something like,
I know.
I think you.
77 or so.
They told me, but like the
No, it's just
example.
sort of start to like think about.
Was it you?
And they've got some exemption for kids under 12,
These-
but not older.
It's probably,
Which,
you would
so
probably
you let you
change
change
it
on the side of the right way. So
alongside.
wording gets so
This is what we used,
jumbled.
this is what we used to say was safe, which is so obviously
you end
not
up
safe.
tying yourself
And then we
in
say,
knots.
well, we're in a period where we know more than we did 20
Yeah.
years ago when the current laws
I know, it's
are
hard.
changing, which is
Oh, there
why,
is, yeah,
you know, if
I
you
think
did an education where you actually
It's
said
starting
like,
to tell
we have
people
learned
to do their
things,
kids.
we were,
Mm.
you know,
So that-
we made these
That's
rules
what
that
they
were like this
Mm.
back then because that's what we thought was
Yeah.
best.
And
You
then,
know, so the more restrictive you get, and people are, you know,
Things since then,
people don't like.
and so now we're changing the law.
And
then you get
So
like.
that people
saying
buy
multiple
into
things you
not
can
just
go
like
and write.
nanny
Otherwise they
stage,
changed
blah,
it.
blah, blah, but if you actually
Yeah,
obey,
I can drive a
did
car,
you know,
I've got
20
a
years
seatbelt.
before that lot did that,
You know,
this is what they thought was safe, you know?
So this
Yeah.
is where I'm saying with old
And once
technology, and
the kids hit 7,
That's net,
They
so
can
the car, the window.
jump on in
cracks
front
in,
of
they
that
don't
car,
know
not have a
what's like.
seatbelt on.
and that's where. I
Stuff
think
like that,
the
that's-
And they didn't have windscreens that had the brake.
Transition
The
from
brake.
kids
Think
to-
about all the things
do
that
now,
we
they
have
pull the
now.
shoulder.
Yeah.
And your seat all the
It
way
was in
back,
my head
sitting
that.
the backrest upright,
like
adjusting your
watched
headrest right.
what
A lot of the cars have
rear-facing
adjustable
and
seat belts here,
seat different
setting that, these are all the things that we forget about, they're
There would
worrying
be
about putting them in
an
the child
argument
restraints,
for
whether it's facing
things
backwards or
like
forwards.
To help.
Better than
How many people stay in
Restraints with the Padraig.
We've got different vehicles now. Are there vehicles
And that's
that
a-
don't have rear seats? You know,
It's better
you see all
than
sorts of
sitting in an
different
adult
cars
seat.
where you've only got kids
And
that
running
can go
around
in the
without
front.
anything. So
What do we do there?
I think
Do you
sometimes
tell
getting
people
back
they
to the
can't,
basics
they
is
can't
what,
do that
what
with
needs to be
children?
not forgotten about.
Because when
Certainly
the
going forward,
Liberal
yes,
Energy
all the
motion was done,
more
when it
seats
was
and having
done
them in the
previously,
position,
that we can have
it's
cars
100%
that are,
required.
there's such a variety.
But there are
of
so
cars
many
now.
that don't even do the seats.
It interests me about, because I guess the whole sibling dynamic is obviously a lot of parents are thinking,
Yeah.
kids boys, we buy more than one or something, isn't it? So you get a sibling, it's like, hey, now you've got to go down the aisle, we've got to move the older one up into the next stage. So hence, maybe that's why for a lot of people, you might keep them rear facing for a certain amount of time, but yeah, not as long because you think, oh, actually.
So am I telling someone who's not using a car seat at all, not? You need to have this brand of car seat, it needs to.
Yes, so perhaps like.
And also saying that's $250 for that one.
Notes?
Yeah, just keep, yeah, RAC, we got one for RAC to do, yeah.
Yeah, we're creating jobs for every other organisation.
And education programs.
Yeah.
Great.
Education. So we'll just wrap up now, but thank you so much to the presenters, Tammie, Patty, Felicity, Melanie online. Excellent source of information, and hopefully we've got some really good notes for the review. I might just quickly hand it to Fritha to do for the ACRES conference coming up.
Do the slide, is it all there?
Right. So for those of you who don't know, the Australasian Road Safety Conference, which happens each year, is happening here in Perth in October. We're super excited. It hasn't been in Perth since 2017. So it's, doesn't come around very often. So it'd be really great to have lots of people from across the road safety community here in WA coming and showing their support. It's the 20th of October to the 23rd. At the Pan Pacific, but we're also doing a technology day down at UWA where you can come and see all sorts of amazing tech that are related to road safety. So let me think. UWA will have their driving simulator, so you can come and check that out and see what it's like to sit and drive in a drive simulator. We're having an actual 60-metre road train there as well, so you can sort of really feel how massive that is, look at the blind spots, look at the stopping distances, stuff like that. Obviously get to climb up and see it as well. There'll be a autonomous vehicle that UWA has that will drive around. Main Roads is going to have its automated cone truck. There's all sorts of stuff. Police are going to have helicopters, and anyway, lots and lots of cool tech as well this year, so that's something different we're doing. So yeah, the registrations are open. It'd be really great to see lots of you there if you're not already signed up. So that's my plug.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, so we'll send, for those of you who would like to send your slides, we'll send those around, and then you'll have my email if you have any other ideas for the submission to the NTC review would be appreciated.
So can we get a link sent around for what you?
Absolutely, yeah, sure.
Definitely. Yep.
Yeah, it's always good to go. And they've got the truck you sit in and watch the film about the blind spots with
Yeah,
the
the
virtual.
truck will be there too, the big purple Insta truck.
Yeah, we said that before.
Instructor, you know what I'm trying to say? Yeah, the trans safe truck will be
Yeah,
there too.
good.
Yeah, DOT is actually, so the transport portfolio is actually one of the major, I can't remember the title, diamond sponsor, platinum sponsor, alongside with the Road Safety Commission. So I think
There'll be more main roads than us.
There'll be DOT people as well.
Cameron will make certain there's lots from transport.
So
Yeah.
what I'm getting at is, so Peter Veronzo is obviously right on board with the whole thing. So you should get support to be able to go. Probably talk to Helen Ginby in Michelle Pryor's team. I think she's helping work out the registrations for DOT. So, and obviously Terry Ann in WALGA. So yeah.
So thanks to everyone online as well. We'll record your chat ideas, and thank you so much.